humanity's dormant chakras to violently open. Society collapses as local street gangs, mafia cartels, and terrorists accidentally stumble into demonic, Asuric, cultivation, using their newfound superhuman strength to butcher law enforcement and take over Indian cities. Aarav, a frontline soldier in the resistance, dies in a devastating battle against a local warlord 10 years after the burst. But instead of moving on to the afterlife, his soul is thrown back in time. He wakes up at his high school desk exactly 2 hours before the Prana Burst hits Earth. This time, his rebirth triggers a cosmic anomaly in his soul, the Multiplier System. The cheat, the Multiplier System. Unlike other cultivators who must meditate for months to gather ambient energy, Aarav possesses a digital-like interface in his mind that applies mathematical multipliers to his actions. Scaling as he levels up, physical multiplier, when he performs Dha-Shuddhai, body tempering, martial arts, 1 push-up yields the results of 10. His kinetic strike force is multiplied on impact. Prana multiplier, while others absorb prana at a 1x rate, Aarav's baseline is a 5x vacuum, instantly filling his nadis, energy channels. Cognitive multiplier, by boosting his intelligence, he can decipher ancient yantras and complex divine mantras in seconds, a process that takes geniuses years. Chapter 1, The Echo of the End. The oppressive heat of Rajpur Sonarpur in May was exactly as Aarav remembered it. The ceiling fan above his desk clicked rhythmically, pushing humid air over 30 sweating high school students. Aarav gasped, his lungs inflating violently as if he had just breached the surface of a black ocean. He gripped the edge of his wooden desk, knuckles turning white. A second ago, a demonic warlord's spear of corrupted Apana energy had pierced his chest, pinning him to the burning ruins of Kolkata. Now, a piece of chalk was hitting the blackboard. Aarav. Are you paying attention, or has the heat finally cooked your brain? His physics teacher droned. Aarav ignored him. He stared at the digital clock above the blackboard. May 20, 2026. 11:03 a.m. He touched his chest. No blood. No gaping hole. He was 18 again. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had died 10 years in the future, at the peak of the Asuric Wars, and somehow, his soul had snapped back to the starting line. He looked at the clock again. The Prana Burst, the cosmic wave that would shatter the barrier between Earth and the celestial realms, was scheduled to hit at exactly 1 p.m. He had less than 2 hours before society collapsed. Suddenly, a sharp, crystalline chime echoed inside his skull. It wasn't a sound, but a vibration that settled deep into his dormant chakras. Ananta protocol initialized, soul anomaly detected, temporal displacement. System bound. Generating multipliers, base physical multiplier, 5x base prana multiplier, 5x base cognitive multiplier, 5x. Aarav blinked. In his past life, he had fought tooth and nail just to reach the Surya Chakra, golden core, stage before he died. Cultivation had been a brutal, agonizing grind. Now, staring at a translucent blue interface hovering in his peripheral vision, he realized the rules had changed. Sir, Aarav said, standing up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I need to use the washroom. Immediately. Without waiting for an answer, he walked out. The countdown had begun. Chapter 2, The Violet Sky. At 12:59 p.m., Aarav sat cross-legged on the roof of the school, hidden behind the concrete housing of the water tank. He was running through the foundational Dha-Shuddhai, body tempering, breathing techniques he had learned a decade later. At exactly 1 p.m., the sky above West Bengal tore open. There was no sound at first, just a blinding flash of violent violet light that stripped the shadows from every building in the city. Then came the pressure. It felt like the atmosphere had instantly turned to liquid. Down in the classrooms, windows shattered inward. Screams erupted as the first wave of raw, unfiltered prana slammed into the unawakened masses. Aarav felt his own blood boil. The energy was trying to force its way into his closed nadis, energy channels, threatening to detonate his heart. System. Aarav thought. Activate cognitive multiplier x5. His mind instantly snapped into perfect, icy clarity. The agonizing pain became data. A complex pranayama, breathing cycle, that had taken him 3 years to master in his past life was calculated, refined, and executed flawlessly in 2 seconds. He inhaled the violent energy, forcing it down his spine. Prana absorption detected. Applying 5x prana multiplier. The ambient energy in a 10-meter radius around Aarav formed a visible vortex. While the students below were passing out from the strain, Aarav was gorging himself. The raw energy slammed against his mortal muscles, tearing them and instantly rebuilding them denser, heavier. Body tempering phase 1 complete. Body tempering phase 2 complete. He opened his eyes. The world looked different. He could track the wings of a fly buzzing 30 feet away. He had skipped months of agonizing bodily purification in 3 minutes. Below him, the screams changed pitch. The panic was turning into something worse. Chapter 3, Blood on the Asphalt. Aarav bounded down the stairwell, skipping entire flights of stairs and landing without a sound. When he reached the ground floor courtyard, total chaos reigned. Teachers were unconscious, bleeding from their noses as their bodies rejected the prana. Outside the main iron gates of the school, the local street syndicate, the Rajpur Kings, were experiencing the opposite. 6 men, armed with crude machetes and iron pipes, were staring at their hands. The gang's leader, a hulking enforcer named Bappa, laughed hysterically. He swung his iron pipe at a parked auto rickshaw, and the sheer kinetic force of his unrefined, awakened muscle sent the vehicle skidding 10 feet across the asphalt. The prana had mutated them, gifting them Asuric, demonic, strength. Open the gates. Bapar roared, his eyes bloodshot with raw tamasic energy. The cops are bleeding out in the streets. Everything is ours now. They began tearing at the chained iron gates, the metal groaning under their unnatural strength. Beyond them, terrified students huddled in the corridors. Aarav pulled a uniform tie from the ground and wrapped it around the lower half of his face. He couldn't expose his identity yet. He slipped out a side door and flanked the gates. Bapa managed to snap the heavy iron chain. Before the gates could swing open, a blur of motion slammed into his chest. Aarav didn't even use a martial art technique. He just threw a standard, textbook jab. Applying physical multiplier x5. Kinetic force output, 500%. The sound was like a cannon firing. Bapa's chest caved in instantly. The sheer concussive force of the punch lifted the 250-pound man off his feet and threw him through the air, crashing into the concrete wall of a shop across the street. He didn't get up. The remaining 5 gang members froze. Aarav didn't give them time to process. He moved faster than their mortal eyes could track. A palm strike to a collarbone shattered it. A sweep kick snapped 2 femurs with the sound of cracking timber. In 4 seconds, the local syndicate was reduced to groaning bodies on the asphalt. Aarav melted back into the shadows of the school before anyone could see his face. He had saved them for now, but he knew the truth, the government was coming. Chapter 4, The Vajra Draft. It took the Indian military 3 days to lock down the city. Tanks rolled through the streets of Rajpur Sonarpur, and soldiers in heavy tactical gear, infused with hastily gathered prana shields, secured the perimeters. The police were obsolete, it was martial law. The Vajra scheme was broadcast on every surviving frequency, all educational institutions are now military gurukuls. All citizens under the age of 20 will be tested. Refusal is treason. Aarav stood in a long line in the school gymnasium. Up front, military scientists were using heavy, glowing crystal arrays early, crude prana scanners to measure the students' spiritual aptitude. Next, barked a scarred military officer. Aarav stepped up and placed his hand on the crystal. He knew how this worked. If he showed his true cultivation base, he would be shipped off to a black site lab in New Delhi for dissection. If he tested too low, he'd be left as civilian fodder. System, he commanded inwardly. Suppress prana signature. Simulate top 5% output. The crystal flared a bright, steady azure. The officer's eyes widened slightly. Class A potential. Excellent foundation. The officer handed Aarav a heavy steel dog tag and a matte black tactical combat knife inscribed with faint, glowing geometric yantras. Congratulations, cadet. You're a squad leader now. The world as you knew it is dead. Your new curriculum is urban warfare. Welcome to the resistance. Aarav gripped the Prana Shastra, spirit weapon. It was a low-tier artifact, barely capable of holding a charge, but in his hands, with his multipliers, it was a weapon of mass destruction. Chapter 5, The Night Hunt. 3 weeks into the lockdown, Aarav's classmates were still struggling to form basic energy shields in their makeshift dojos. Aarav, however, had reached the absolute peak of Diha Shuddhai. He needed to break through to Prana Sanchaya, chi condensation, but the ambient energy in the school wasn't dense enough. He needed a core. He needed an Asura. At 2 a.m., Aarav slipped past the military patrols, scaling the barbed wire fences of the school with zero effort. The city outside was a war zone. Half of Rajpur was under military control, the other half had been claimed by a unified cartel. Aarav stalked through the ruined streets, his cognitive multiplier mapping the patrol routes of the cartel thugs. He was hunting a specific target, a lieutenant known as the Butcher, who had slaughtered a military convoy to steal a massive shipment of condensed prana cores. He found the Butcher in an abandoned warehouse, surrounded by a dozen armed guards. The lieutenant was sitting cross-legged, surrounded by glowing blue stones, trying to forcibly consume their energy. Aarav didn't hesitate. He dropped from the skylight directly into the center of the guards. Physical multiplier x5 activated. His tactical knife was a blur of black metal and blue prana. He moved with the efficiency of a veteran soldier, severing arteries and crushing windpipes before the guards could even unholster their weapons. The Butcher roared, his body swelling with corrupted tamasic energy as he lunged at Aarav with a massive, aura-coated machete. Aarav ducked the swing, the wind pressure alone cutting his cheek. He drove his hand forward, pressing his palm directly against the Butcher's chest, right over his heart. Prana multiplier x5 activated. Initiating forced extraction. Aarav didn't just strike him, he turned his own body into a vacuum. The system violently ripped the stolen prana out of the Butcher's meridians, filtering out the demonic taint and flooding Aarav's nadis. The cartel boss withered into a husk in seconds, collapsing into dust. Massive prana influx detected. Breaking foundation, realm advance, prana sanchaya, chi condensation, achieved. Aarav stood up in the dark warehouse. A visible aura of azure fire flickered around his body. The true path to immortality had just begun, and this time, he had the math on his side. Chapter 6, The Ashwamedha Protocol. 2 months into the Vajra scheme, the military realized they had a problem. They had gathered tens of thousands of awakened students, but they only had one working prototype of a tactical Divya Astra, heavenly weapon. To decide which Gurukul would receive it, High Command initiated the Ashwamedha Protocol, a brutal, nationally televised combat tournament held in the ruins of the Salt Lake Stadium in Kolkata. The stadium had been reinforced with massive geometric yantras carved into the concrete, projecting a shimmering blue prana shield to protect the military VIPs in the skyboxes. Aarav stood in the subterranean waiting tunnels with his Rajpur squad. His teammates, two terrified teenagers who could barely maintain a prana shield, and a girl who could shoot weak sparks of Agni, fire, from her knuckles, were visibly shaking. "They're going to slaughter us," muttered Rohan, the shield bearer. Through the tunnel gates, Aarav could see the elite squads. The Kolkata Central Gurukul was entirely composed of aristocratic Suryavansha, Solar Dynasty, heirs. They wore pristine, heat-resistant tactical armor and radiated a suffocating, oppressive aura of pure fire. "We just need to survive," Aarav said, his voice calm, cutting through his squad's panic. He didn't tell them the truth. He wasn't here to survive. The prize for the tournament was the digital blueprint of the Indra Dart, an astra designed to pierce Asuric domains. But Aarav's past life memory recognized the glowing holographic schematic rotating above the stadium. The military thought they had reverse-engineered a lightning weapon. They were wrong. It was a fragmented blueprint for the Brahmashura, a weapon of mass extinction. If an unrefined cadet tried to summon it, it would vaporize the entire city. Aarav had to win it. Not for glory, but to bury it. Chapter 7, Suppressed Kinetic Output. Match 4, Rajpur Sector vs Howrah Industrial Gurukul. Begin, the announcer's magically amplified voice boomed across the stadium. The gates opened. Aarav's squad stepped onto the blasted concrete arena. Their opponents were massive, heavily mutated students who practiced smog cultivation. Their skin was slate grey, and thick, toxic prana vented from their mouths with every exhale. "Stay behind me. Do not engage," Aarav ordered his squad. The Howrah captain laughed, a guttural sound that rattled his chest. He lunged, moving with terrifying speed for a teenager, his fists encased in a corrosive, black aura aimed straight at Aarav's head. Aarav didn't blink. "System," he calculated instantly. "If I use the X5 physical multiplier, I will punch a hole through his chest and expose my chi condensation cultivation base. Throttle physical output. Activate cognitive multiplier X5. Cognitive multiplier X5 activated. Processing enemy trajectory. Calculating weak points." To Aarav, the charging captain seemed to be moving underwater. He saw the exact pivot of the boy's hips, the overextension of his shoulder, and the microscopic gap in his corrosive aura just beneath his left armpit. Aarav stepped smoothly inside the guard, avoiding the black prana entirely. He raised his hand, forming a precise, two-finger strike, and tapped a specific nadi, energy meridian, node under the captain's arm. He applied exactly 0 prana. It was purely anatomical, physical mastery. The captain froze. His eyes rolled back into his head, and he collapsed to the concrete like a cut puppet. The strike had pinched the nerve and short-circuited his prana flow simultaneously. The stadium fell dead silent. The military VIPs in the skyboxes leaned forward, staring at the screens. The sensors hadn't registered a massive energy spike. They just saw a no-name kid from Rajpur drop a juggernaut with a 2-inch tap. Aarav turned to the remaining 3 Howrah students. "Surrender. Or I shut down your meridians permanently." They dropped their weapons. Chapter 8, The Solar Heir. Aarav's squad coasted into the finals purely on the back of his surgical, terrifying efficiency. He didn't use flashy elemental attacks. He simply dismantled every opponent with perfect anatomical geometry, dodging strikes by fractions of a millimeter. But the finals were different. Standing across from Aarav was Devansh, the captain of the Kolkata Central Gurukul and the crown jewel of the Suryavansha bloodline. Devansh wasn't just a cadet, he was a prodigy. He held a custom-forged Prana Shastra, a long sword that radiated a blistering heat capable of melting asphalt. "You have no aura," Devansh sneered, the air rippling around him as his inner fire raged. "You fight like a mortal street brawler. You are unworthy of the Astra." "And you," Aarav replied, his voice cold, "are leaking energy from your Surya Chakra because your foundation is arrogant and unstable." Devansh roared, his pride stung. He didn't hold back. He swung his sword, unleashing a massive, crescent-shaped wave of pure, condensed solar fire that spanned the width of the arena. It was a lethal strike, highly illegal in a sanctioned tournament. The VIPs shouted in alarm, but the stadium's referees couldn't intervene in time. The heat wave hit Aarav's position, creating a blinding explosion that shattered the concrete floor. Smoke billowed into the sky. Devansh smirked, lowering his sword. He missed the core issue, a voice whispered directly into Devansh's ear. Devansh's blood ran cold. He spun around. Aarav was standing directly behind him, completely unharmed. The air around Aarav was no longer suppressed. A terrifying, azure fire pure, condensed prana sanchaya energy flickered around his body, instantly suffocating Devansh's solar heat. "System," Aarav thought. "Unseal physical multiplier. Set to X3. Aarav swept a leg beneath Devansh's guard, shattering his stance. As the prodigy fell, Aarav drove a knee directly into his solar plexus. The kinetic impact bypassed Devansh's armor entirely, cracking his ribs and scattering his accumulated prana to the wind. Devansh hit the floor, unconscious before he even bounced. Aarav stood over him, the azure fire retracting into his body as quickly as it had appeared. He looked up at the VIP skybox, locking eyes with the Supreme Commander of the Eastern Command. "I believe," Aarav said, his voice carrying perfectly across the silent stadium, that blueprint belongs to me. Chapter 9, The Bottleneck of the Flesh. Winning the tournament and securing the Indradart blueprint came with a hidden cost. Later that night, sitting in the reinforced barracks of the Kolkata Central Military Base, Aarav coughed into his hand. The blood on his palm was black, laced with crackling azure energy. He pulled up his shirt. Across his ribs, a network of dark, bruised veins pulsed unnaturally. This was the dark side of the Ananta Protocol. The system was a cosmic cheat code, but Aarav's physical vessel was still bound by the laws of biology. Using a 5x physical multiplier to shatter a Suryavancha prodigy's armor had caused microfractures across his skeletal structure and minor tearing in his nadis, energy channels. The 5x multiplier was the absolute limit of his current prana sanchaya, chi condensation, body. If he tried to push it to 6x, his muscles would detonate from the kinetic force. Yet, Aarav knew what was coming. The cartel warlord he was destined to fight was already approaching the Surya Chakra, Golden Core, stage. To fight a Golden Core monster as a Foundation Establishment cultivator, a 5x multiplier wouldn't be enough. He needed to double it. He needed the X10 upgrade. As he meditated, the crystalline chime of the system echoed in his mind. Ananta Protocol, upgrade path detected current multiplier limit, 5x. To unlock Tier 2, 10x multiplier, host must override local cosmic constraints by reconstructing the physical and spiritual vessel. Required reagents for Tier 2 ascension, 0/3. Aarav opened his eyes. In his past life, he had heard rumors of how supreme artifacts and bodies were forged. He didn't just need to cultivate, he needed to turn his own body into a Divya Astra, heavenly weapon. To do that, he had to hunt down 3 mythological resources that had manifested in the modern, concrete jungle of West Bengal. The upgrade blueprint, gathering the cosmic reagents. To handle the exponential strain of a 10x multiplier, Aarav's bones, blood, and mind require a total overhaul. Here is the system's shopping list for the upcoming arc. 1 Vatra Besma, fossilized lightning ash. The purpose, upgrading the physical multiplier. Regular calcium bones will shatter under a 10x kinetic strike. Aarav must replace his bone marrow with the remnant energy of heavenly lightning, turning his skeleton into an unbreakable Vatra, diamond/thunderbolt. The location, the tallest skyscraper in Kolkata, the 42. When the Prana Burst hit, the building acted as a massive lightning rod, catching a stray heavenly tribulation bolt meant for an ascending spirit beast. The strike fused the penthouse's steel and concrete into a rare, electrically charged glass ash. The obstacle, the skyscraper has been claimed by a flock of mutated, predatory Garudas, giant, eagle-like spiritual beasts, who nest in the ruins of the top floors. Aarav must scale an 800-foot elevator shaft and steal the ash without getting ripped apart in the sky. 2 Rakta Soma, blood Soma nectar. The purpose, upgrading the prana multiplier. To handle a 10x intake of cosmic energy, Aarav's nadis must become incredibly elastic and vast. Soma is the mythical nectar of the gods, known for granting immortality and healing any physical tear. The location, the Hooghly River. The sudden influx of prana has mutated a patch of sacred lotuses growing near an industrial chemical drainage pipe. The toxic pollution mixed with the divine energy has created a volatile, blood-red variant of Soma. The obstacle, the riverbed, is controlled by a local cartel faction practicing the Vamamarga, left-hand path. They are harvesting the toxic nectar to create highly addictive, prana-laced street drugs. Aarav has to dismantle a heavily armed aquatic drug ring to secure the pure roots of the lotus. 3 Ahamkaras Vatika, the ego crystal. The purpose, upgrading the cognitive multiplier. Processing ancient combat geometry and deciphering mantras at 10x speed will fry Aarav's mortal brain. He needs a spiritual processor, the crystallized ego of an Asuric cultivator. The location, the underground fighting rings of Hara. The obstacle, Aarav cannot forge this himself. He must find an Azuropath cultivator who has inflated their ego, Ahamkara, to the absolute limit, kill them, and physically extract the crystal that forms in the center of their brain. His target is the right-hand enforcer of the Warlord who killed him in his past life, a man who uses illusion arts, Mayavi Vidya, to make himself seem completely invincible. Chapter 10, The Skyscraper Ascent. The next night, under the cover of a thick, unseasonal fog rolling off the Bay of Bengal, Aarav stood at the base of the 42. The luxury residential skyscraper was dark, its power grid completely fried by the tribulation strike. He strapped his black tactical knife to his thigh and tightened his combat boots. He had 48 hours before the military brass expected him back at the academy to brief them on the Indradart blueprint. He looked up. 600 feet above, the jagged, melted ruins of the penthouse glowed with a faint, crackling blue aura. A massive shadow, easily the size of a military helicopter, detached itself from the building and circled in the fog. A Garuda. Aarav took a deep breath, visualizing the architectural schematics of the building. System, he commanded. Allocate 2x multiplier to agility and muscle twitch response. Conserve prana. He leaped toward the exposed exterior elevator shaft, his fingers digging into the reinforced concrete like claws. The hunt for the 10x upgrade had begun. Since you are scaling the skyscraper, the most immediate and thrilling path is to finish the ascent, face the apex predators, and claim the first piece of the upgrade. Here is the continuation of Aarav's hunt. Chapter 11, The Apex Predator. By the 50th floor, the air grew thin, and the coastal crosswinds whipped through the exposed elevator shaft like invisible blades. Aarav's fingers were bleeding, the skin torn by jagged concrete and exposed rebar, but his breathing remained perfectly rhythmic. Agility multiplier x2 maintained. Prana reserves, 88%. At the 64th floor, the concrete gave way to something else entirely. The walls of the shaft had been subjected to such immense cosmic heat that the steel framing had melted and fused with the glass windows, creating a smooth, crystalline tunnel smelling sharply of ozone. The Vajrabhasma was close. Aarav hauled himself over the ledge and rolled into the ruined penthouse. It didn't look like a luxury apartment anymore, it looked like the crater of a volcano. A massive hole was blown through the roof where the heavenly tribulation lightning had struck. In the center of the room, nested among piles of shredded designer furniture and pulverized marble, sat a chunk of fused, translucent ash the size of a human skull. It pulsed with a violent, crackling blue light. Before Aarav could take a step, the wind pressure in the room vanished. The air went dead silent. Above, his combat instincts screamed. Aarav threw himself backward just as a blur of golden brown feathers and steel-rending talons slammed into the exact spot he had been standing. The concrete shattered. It was a Garuda. The beast was easily 12 feet across from wingtip to wingtip. Its feathers possessed a metallic sheen, and its beak was serrated like a saw blade. This wasn't just an animal mutated by Prana, it had absorbed the ambient lightning of the penthouse, evolving into a low-tier spiritual beast. The creature shrieked a sound that sent a shockwave of compressed air straight at Aarav's chest. Aarav crossed his arms, flooding them with Prana to create a localized shield. The sonic blast hit him like a truck, sliding him backward until his boots hung over the edge of the 65-story drop. System, Aarav analyzed rapidly, his eyes locked on the beast. If I strike it directly with a 5x physical multiplier, my forearm bones will snap from the recoil against its metallic feathers. Warning, enemy bone density exceeds host's current physical limit by 300%. He couldn't outmuscle it. He had to outthink it. The Garuda lunged again, its wings glowing with crackling electricity. It wasn't just flying, it was riding the electromagnetic currents of the room. Aarav drew his black tactical knife. Come on, overgrown pigeon, Aarav whispered. He sprinted not away from the beast, but directly toward the glowing chunk of Vajrabhasma in the center of the room. The Garuda, enraged that a mortal insect was nearing its treasure, abandoned its aerial dive and swooped low, its talons reaching for Aarav's spine. Cognitive multiplier x5 activated. Calculating trajectory. At the very last microsecond, Aarav dropped into a slide across the polished marble floor. The Garuda's talons sparked against the stone where his head had just been. As the massive bird overshot him, Aarav drove his tactical knife upward, completely bypassing the armored feathers. He plunged the prana-infused blade directly into the unarmored joint where the creature's wing met its torso. The Garuda shrieked in agony, its right wing folding inward. It crashed violently into the far wall, thrashing in a tangle of broken glass and lightning. Aarav didn't wait for it to recover. He scrambled to the center of the room and grabbed the pulsing Vajrabhasma. Chapter 12, Marrow of the Storm. The moment Aarav's bare skin touched the lightning ash, it felt like he had grabbed a live high-voltage power line. His muscles seized violently. Vajrabhasma, fossilized lightning ash, acquired. Initiating Tier 2 physical ascension, warning, extreme host tissue damage imminent. Do it. Aarav roared through gritted teeth, falling to his knees. He didn't put the ash in a backpack, cultivation didn't work like a video game inventory. He forcefully channeled his prana into the chunk of ash, violently crushing it into a fine, glowing dust, and inhaled it directly into his lungs. The reaction was instantaneous. The lightning energy didn't just flow through his nadis, it bypassed them entirely and drilled straight into his bone marrow. Aarav slammed his forehead against the marble floor, a primal scream tearing from his throat. Inside him, his mortal calcium bones were microfracturing, burning away, and reforming as dense, crystalline structures capable of holding cosmic kinetic energy. Across the room, the crippled Garuda dragged itself upright. Seeing the human consuming its treasure, it let out a final, desperate screech and charged, aiming its serrated beak right at Aarav's neck. Aarav stopped screaming. He slowly looked up. His eyes were completely bloodshot, but the pupils glowed with a terrifying, electrical blue hue. As the Garuda snapped its beak shut, Aarav simply raised his left forearm to block it. Clang! The sound of metal striking metal rang out. The Garuda's beak clamped down on Aarav's bare arm, but it didn't even break the skin. The bird's eyes widened in confusion. Ascension complete, Vajra skeletal structure forged. Physical limit cap removed. Aarav grabbed the creature's massive beak with his right hand. System, Aarav whispered, a grim smile forming on his lips. Activate physical multiplier. 10 times. Physical multiplier x10 activated. With a single, effortless twist, Aarav snapped the beast's neck. The massive creature went limp, collapsing into a heap of feathers. Aarav stood up, rolling his shoulders. The bruised veins across his ribs were gone. He felt heavier, denser, yet incredibly fast. The first chain on his mortal body was broken. He walked to the edge of the shattered penthouse, looking down at the fog-covered city of Kolkata. 1 reagent down. 2 to go. It was time to pay a visit to the river cartel. Chapter 13, The Poisoned Lotus. The Hooghly River smelled of rot, sulfur, and raw, unrestrained magic. Standing on the rusted walkway of an abandoned Howrah chemical plant, Aarav looked down at the riverbank. The water here wasn't just polluted, it was completely saturated with tamasic, chaotic, energy. The Prana Burst had reacted violently with the industrial runoff, creating a localized dead zone where the air literally tasted like ash. Below him, the riverbank was illuminated by the sickly green glow of halogen work lights. The cartel had set up a massive, crude refinery. Aarav zoomed in using his cognitive multiplier X5. Dozens of heavily armed men patrolled the perimeter. They weren't standard street thugs. They were Vimamarga, left-hand path, cultivators. They wore heavy tactical vests over bare chests smeared with cremation ash. Some carried modern assault rifles edged with blood-red yantras, while others held human skulls, kapalas, used as focal points for dark energy. In the center of the camp, an industrial drainage pipe spilled glowing, toxic sludge into a small, netted-off section of the river. Growing directly out of that toxic sludge was a patch of massive lotuses. Their petals were the color of freshly spilled blood. Raktasoma. The blood nectar. The cartel's laborers were carefully extracting the glowing sap from the lotus stems, boiling it down in steel drums to create a highly addictive, prana-lacing street narcotic. They were ruining a divine reagent for cheap thrills. System warning, host's physical/prana imbalance detected. Current physical base, 10x. Current prana intake, 5x. Caution, sustained combat will drain prana reserves 50% faster due to new skeletal density. Aarav drew his matte black tactical knife. His Vatra, lightning ash, skeleton made him incredibly heavy and dense. Every step he took required more prana to cushion his own weight. He couldn't afford a protracted firefight. He needed to end this in under 3 minutes. Chapter 14, The Left-Hand Path. Aarav didn't bother with stealth. Stealth was for assassins with fragile bones. He stepped off the 50-foot gantry and dropped straight down like a meteor. He channeled a fraction of his prana to his feet, just enough to keep his boots from shattering, and let gravity and his new Vatra density do the rest. He landed directly in the center of the cartel camp. The impact cracked the concrete riverbank, sending a shockwave of kinetic force outward that knocked 3 patrolling guards off their feet and shattered the nearest halogen lights. Intruder, a cartel cultivator screamed, leveling a yantra-edged AK-47. Before the man could pull the trigger, Aarav moved. Physical multiplier X10 activated. The speed was terrifying. Aarav didn't just run, the ground exploded beneath his boots. He crossed 40 feet in a fraction of a second, appearing directly in front of the gunman. Aarav swung a backhand. He didn't use a martial technique or a prana strike. It was pure, brute physics. The backhand struck the man's tactical vest. The Kevlar plates shattered like cheap glass, and the man was launched horizontally into the river with bone-crunching force. Gunfire erupted. Bullets sparked against Aarav's prana-shielded skin. While his skin was still mortal, his lightning-infused skeleton absorbed the kinetic shock entirely. He didn't even flinch. Aarav waded through the cartel members like a god of war. A sweep kick snapped a concrete pillar in half, dropping a catwalk onto a sniper. A palm strike to a thug's chest stopped his heart instantly. With the 10x physical multiplier, every strike he threw possessed the stopping power of a heavy artillery shell. But the system's warning proved true. As Aarav snapped the neck of a fifth guard, his breath hitched. The azure fire flickering around his body dimmed. Pushing a 10x physical body with a 5x prana engine was like putting a lawnmower engine in a tank. He was running out of gas. Hold your fire, a raspy, echoing voice commanded. The remaining cartel members backed away. From the main refinery tent emerged the cartel boss. He was a massive, scarred man wearing a garland of cracked human femurs. His aura was entirely black, stinking of apana, death energy. He wielded a heavy, jagged cleaver dripping with acidic, tamasic prana. A military lapdog, the boss sneered. Your body is strong, boy. But flesh rots. Let me show you the true power of the grave. The boss slashed his cleaver through the air, sending a wave of corrosive, black liquid fire straight at Aarav. Chapter 15, The Nadi Expansion. Aarav didn't have the prana reserves left to block a localized magical attack of that scale. So, he didn't try. System, Aarav commanded, deactivate prana shield entirely. Reroute all remaining energy to the legs. Physical multiplier X10. Aarav dropped low, sliding under the black wave of acid. The tamasic energy singed the hairs on his arms and melted the concrete behind him, but Aarav used the momentum of his slide to launch himself upward, directly at the boss. The boss's eyes widened, desperately raising his heavy cleaver to block. Aarav didn't use his knife. He drove his Vatra dense elbow squarely into the flat of the cartel boss's cleaver. The 10x kinetic force hit the demonic steel, violently shattering the weapon into a dozen pieces. The momentum carried Aarav's elbow straight through the broken blade and into the boss's sternum, caving his chest in instantly. The boss collapsed, dead before he hit the mud. The surviving cartel thugs took one look at their shattered leader and scattered into the night, abandoning the camp. Aarav fell to one knee, gasping for air. His prana reserves were at 2%. His mortal muscles were screaming in agony, completely starved of energy. He dragged himself toward the glowing, red lotuses growing in the toxic sludge. He didn't have time to refine it in a pill furnace. Aarav reached into the thick, bloody sap of the Raktasoma root, ripped a massive handful of it free, and shoved it directly into his mouth. It tasted like burning copper and pure ozone. The reaction was violent. The toxic impurities in the sludge tried to melt his internal organs, but the divine soma within it immediately began hyper-regenerating his cells. It was an agonizing cycle of destruction and rebirth. Aarav forced himself into a lotus position, utilizing his cognitive multiplier X5 to manually direct the violent energy through his nadis. Roctosoma, blood nectar, ingested. Initiating Tier 2 Prana Ascension, purging tamasic impurities. Expanding nadi capacity. Inside his body, his 72,000 microscopic energy channels were being violently stretched, tearing open and fusing back together 10 times wider. The azure fire around him erupted into a massive, roaring pillar of light, evaporating the toxic sludge around him instantly. When Aarav finally opened his eyes, the dawn was just beginning to break over the Hooghly River. He took a breath. The ambient prana in the air rushed into his lungs with the force of a vacuum. He felt weightless. The suffocating density of his Vajra skeleton was perfectly counterbalanced by the massive, raging ocean of prana now sitting in his core. Ascension complete, Prana Multiplier X10 activated. System synergy achieved. Combat output optimized. Aarav stood up, perfectly refreshed. 2 reagents acquired. His body and his energy were now ready. He just needed the processor to handle it all. It was time to hunt the Warlord's right-hand man for the Ego Crystal. Chapter 16, The Pits of Hara. The Hara Underground was located deep beneath an abandoned railway depot, a subterranean cathedral of violence where the modern world met ancient bloodlust. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, cheap alcohol, and the metallic tang of unrestrained prana. In the center of the depot, a fighting pit had been carved out of the bedrock. Here, rogue cultivators, cartel enforcers, and corrupt military dropouts fought for spirit stones, rare weapons, and sheer, unfiltered ego. Aarav stood in the shadows of the betting bleachers, wearing a plain black hoodie and a cloth mask obscuring the lower half of his face. He didn't care about the low-level fighters throwing clumsy Agni, fire, and Vayu, wind, strikes in the pit. His eyes were locked on the VIP balcony overlooking the arena. Sitting on a velvet sofa, surrounded by sycophants and terrified attendants, was a man in a pristine white suit. He was tossing grapes into his mouth, looking utterly bored. This was Kala, the Mirage. In Aarav's past life, Kala had been the Warlord's shadow and assassin who used Mayavi Vidya, illusion arts, to slaughter entire military platoons without ever unsheathing a blade. Kala's cultivation path relied entirely on ahamkara, ego. By convincing himself and his enemies that he was an untouchable god, he bent reality to match his delusion. That immense, concentrated arrogance crystallized in his brain, acting as a supreme spiritual processor. It was exactly what Aarav needed. Aarav stepped out of the shadows and vaulted over the steel railing, dropping 30 feet perfectly into the center of the fighting pit. The concrete spider webbed beneath his heavy Vajra boots. The current fighter's 2 massive brawlers froze. I'm not here for the prize pool, Aarav's voice echoed off the depot walls, amplified perfectly by a tiny fraction of his X10 prana. He pointed a finger directly at the VIP balcony. I'm here for the man in the white suit. Come down, Kala, and show me if you are actually a god, or just a parlor trick. The depot went dead silent. Insulting Kala in his own arena was a death sentence. Kala stopped chewing. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. He simply stepped off the balcony. He didn't fall. He descended slowly, as if gravity were a suggestion he had politely declined. He landed silently across from Aarav, dusting off his pristine suit. A nameless military rat, Kala sighed, his voice echoing from everywhere at once. You want to see a god? I will make you worship me. Chapter 17, The Hall of Mirrors. Kala didn't throw a punch. He simply snapped his fingers. The lighting in the depot instantly shifted. The cheering crowd vanished, replaced by an endless void of reflective obsidian glass. Aarav found himself standing in the center of a nightmare. Suddenly, there wasn't one Kala. There were 50 of them, all walking slowly in a perfect circle around Aarav, their footsteps echoing perfectly in sync. System, Aarav commanded. Activate Cognitive Multiplier X5. Filter Optical Illusions. Cognitive Multiplier X5 activated. Scanning for physical mass. Warning, enemy tamasic output exceeds host's processing capability. Illusion is bending local light and sound waves. Cannot lock target. Aarav grit his teeth. His brain felt like it was overheating, struggling to process the conflicting sensory data. The 5X processor was simply too weak to decode an Asuric master's top-tier illusion. You can't track me, boy, all 50 Kalas spoke simultaneously. I am everywhere. You are nothing. A blade materialized out of thin air, slashing across Aarav's shoulder. Aarav reacted a fraction of a second too late, his 5X mind lagging behind his 10X body. The blade struck his shoulder, tearing his hoodie, but it sparked harmlessly against his Vajra-dense collarbone. Aarav didn't bleed, but the sheer kinetic force of the invisible strike staggered him. Another strike came from behind, sweeping his legs. Aarav fell to one knee. 3 more invisible impacts hammered his chest and back. He was taking 0 structural damage, but the disorientation was sickening. The illusion was flawless, Kala was attacking from impossible angles, hiding his true physical body within the chaotic sensory overload of his domain. Why won't you bleed? Kala's voice hissed, a hint of frustration breaking through his godlike facade. Mortal flesh should be in ribbons. Aarav took a deep breath, letting the chaotic prana wash over him. You're right, Aarav said, closing his eyes. My mind can't track you. He slowly stood up. The azure fire of his fully unlocked Prana Sanchaya foundation erupted from his core, illuminating the obsidian void in a blinding blue light. But I don't need to see you, Aarav whispered, if I just destroy the entire room. Chapter 18, Shattering the Delusion. Warning, synchronizing physical X10 and Prana X10 multipliers. Output exceeding structural limits of surrounding environment. Aarav didn't aim at the illusions. He aimed at the floor. He channeled his massive prana reserves entirely into his right leg, infusing his Vajra skeleton with the explosive force of a bomb. He stomped the ground. The impact was cataclysmic. A localized earthquake ripped through the Hara depot. The bedrock shattered, exploding upward in a massive shockwave of concrete, dust, and raw kinetic energy. The Mayavi Vidya illusion relied on perfect concentration and the manipulation of light. The sheer, overwhelming physical violence of Aarav's shockwave instantly broke Kala's concentration. The obsidian void shattered like a mirror, revealing the gritty, dust-choked reality of the underground arena. The crowd was screaming, clinging to the bleachers as the ground heaved. Through the thick cloud of pulverized concrete, Aarav saw him. Kala was stumbling backward, his pristine white suit covered in dust, his face twisted in shock. The god was bleeding from his nose. Aarav moved. With his X10 physical multiplier, he crossed the arena faster than a bullet. Before Kala could even raise his hands to weave a new illusion, Aarav's hand clamped around his throat, lifting him 2 feet off the ground. Kala clawed frantically at Aarav's grip, his ahamkara, ego, violently deflating as he realized he was entirely helpless. He wasn't a god, he was just a man suffocating in the grip of a monster. Please, Kala choked out, his eyes wide with genuine, mortal terror. The warlord will miss you, Aarav said coldly. Aarav didn't snap his neck. He raised his free hand, extending 2 fingers, and drove them directly into the center of Kala's forehead, the Ajna chakra, the third eye. He forcefully injected a spike of prana directly into Kala's mind, latching onto the dense, crystallized sphere of arrogance and spiritual energy housed within. With a vicious pull, Aarav extracted it. Kala's eyes rolled back, and his body went limp, his consciousness permanently erased. Aarav dropped the body. In his hand, hovering just above his palm, was the Ahamkara Sphatika, a jagged, diamond-like crystal that pulsed with a hypnotic, iridescent light. It was the physical manifestation of a supreme ego. Without hesitating, Aarav crushed the crystal in his fist and pressed his glowing palm against his own forehead. Ahamkara Sphatika, ego crystal, absorbed. Initiating Tier 2 cognitive ascension, rewiring neural pathways. Expanding processing capacity. The world stopped. Aarav's mind expanded exponentially. The chaotic dust settling in the arena slowed to a crawl. He could calculate the exact trajectory of every falling pebble, process the terrified heartbeats of the crowd hundreds of feet away, and decipher the complex, lingering yantras of Kala's shattered illusion in microseconds. Ascension complete, cognitive multiplier X10 activated. Tier 2 system synchronization, 100%. Host status, perfected foundation. Aarav lowered his hand, his eyes burning with absolute clarity. He had the unbreakable body of a Vajra, the endless energy of a Raktasoma ocean, and the cold, terrifying processing power of a crystallized god mind. The 10x multiplier was complete. He looked up through the shattered roof of the depot toward the night sky. The warlord's time was up. Chapter 19, The Blood Yantra. The notification on Aarav's military-issued encrypted comms link flashed red, cutting through the silence of the Hara depot. Urgent directive, Eastern Command blackout. Kolkata Central Gurukul under massive assault. Prana shields compromised. Casualties, unknown. All available cadets. The transmission dissolved into static. Aarav stood over Kala's lifeless body, his mind operating at speeds that mortal biology shouldn't allow. The cognitive multiplier X10 immediately processed the timeline. Aarav is moving early, Aarav realized. Aarav. The warlord of the syndicate. The man who, in Aarav's past life, had successfully sacrificed 10,000 citizens to forcibly forge a corrupted Surya Chakra, golden core. With Kala dead, Aarav must have realized his grip on the underworld was slipping. He wasn't waiting for the lunar eclipse anymore, he was launching his ascension ritual tonight, and he was using the military academy packed with high-density prana cadets as his sacrificial altar. Aarav didn't run to a vehicle. With his Vajra skeleton and massive Raktasoma reserves, driving would only slow him down. He leaped from the shattered roof of the depot, channeling a fraction of his energy into his legs. Synchronized output, agility multiplier X10. He hit the ground and vanished. He moved like a localized hurricane, shattering the asphalt beneath him with every step, tearing through the abandoned highways of the city at near supersonic speeds. The wind shrieked as he tore a straight line toward Kolkata Central. Tonight, he wouldn't die in the dirt. He was bringing the apocalypse to Aarav's doorstep. Chapter 20, The Siege of Central Command. The Kolkata Central Gurukul was burning. The massive blue yantras that usually projected the military-grade prana shields were cracked and bleeding dark, tamasic energy. Inside the sprawling compound, the elite cadet squads were being slaughtered. Devansh, the Suryavansha prodigy Aarav had defeated in the tournament, was on his knees. His custom solar longsword was snapped in half. Around him, the corpses of his squad mates littered the courtyard. Standing over him were 3 of Aarav's elite Asuric enforcers, their bodies swollen with stolen, chaotic energy. The military's finest, one of the enforcers laughed, raising a heavy battle axe dripping with acid. Your blood will feed the master's core perfectly. Devansh closed his eyes, bracing for the end. A sonic boom shattered the windows of the barracks. Before the enforcer could swing his axe, a black blur slammed into him. The impact sounded like a mortar shell detonating. The enforcer's torso simply ceased to exist, his upper half launched over the academy walls into the night, while his legs remained standing for a morbid second before collapsing. The remaining 2 enforcers froze, paralyzed by the sheer violence of the strike. Aarav stood in the center of the crater he had just created, slowly exhaling a breath of azure, mist-like prana. His eyes locked onto the remaining Asuras. "Who, what are you?" one of them stammered. Aarav didn't answer. He simply stepped forward. Physical X10 plus Prana X10 synchronization maintained. He moved so fast that the enforcer's eyes registered him standing still while his actual body was already behind them. Aarav grabbed the backs of their heads and slammed them together. Their reinforced skulls shattered like porcelain, dropping them instantly. Devansh stared at Aarav in absolute terror and awe. The boy he had fought in the arena was gone, the entity standing before him felt like an awakened god of war. "Where is Aarav?" Aarav asked, his voice completely devoid of emotion. The main courtyard," Devansh choked out. "He's trapped the generals and the cadets in a massive blood seal. He's absorbing them." Aarav didn't wait. He launched himself toward the center of the base. Chapter 21, The False Sun. The main courtyard was a scene from a mythological nightmare. A massive, glowing crimson geometric seal Avama Marga Yantra was etched into the parade ground using the blood of fallen soldiers. Hundreds of cadets and officers were trapped within its borders, levitating inches off the ground, screaming as their life force, prana, was violently ripped from their bodies. Hovering at the epicenter of the seal was Aarav. He was a mountain of a man, his skin glowing with an unbearable, blistering heat. He was absorbing the stolen energy, forcing it down into his danshan. A miniature, corrupted sun was forming in the center of his chest. He was forcibly forging a Surya chakra. The ambient pressure of a golden core cultivator was immense. Gravity itself seemed to warp around him. The air was so hot the concrete was turning to slag. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Bairov's voice boomed, vibrating the teeth in Aarav's skull. The warlord opened his eyes, staring down at Aarav. "A foundation stage rat survives the purge. But it matters not. In 3 minutes, I become a god. The military, the government, they will all bow to my domain." "You aren't a god," Aarav said, stepping onto the edge of the blood seal. Bairov sneered. He pointed a single finger at Aarav. "Die." A beam of condensed, hyper-pressurized solar fire shot from his finger, melting the air itself as it traveled toward Aarav's head. It was an attack that could vaporize a tank. Cognitive Multiplier X10 activated. Processing attack vector. Calculating evasion, evasion unnecessary. Aarav didn't dodge. He raised his right hand, channeling the vast ocean of Raktasoma energy through his Vatra bones. He caught the beam in his palm. The kinetic and thermal shockwave blew the surrounding buildings to rubble, but Aarav didn't move an inch. His boots ground deep into the concrete, but his arm didn't bend. Bairov's eyes widened in absolute shock. A chi condensation mortal had just caught a golden core strike barehanded. "Impossible." "Your core is forced," Aarav said coldly, slowly crushing the beam of fire in his grip until it shattered into harmless sparks. "It's built on stolen blood and fragile ego. Your foundation is garbage." Aarav crouched low. System override, maximum output. He leaped. The ground beneath him disintegrated. He crossed the distance instantly, appearing directly above the levitating warlord. Aarav drove a perfectly calculated, X10 multiplier axe kick straight down into Bairov's shoulder. The warlord crossed his arms to block, but the sheer, unfathomable density of Aarav's Vatra skeleton broke through his golden core aura. Bairov was sent crashing into the ground like a meteor, shattering his own blood seal and dropping the captive cadets to the floor. Chapter 22, The Brahmashira Spark. Bairov climbed out of the crater, coughing up black blood. His pristine, godlike arrogance was gone, replaced by the cornered panic of a dying beast. His incomplete Surya chakra was destabilizing from the kinetic trauma Aarav had just inflicted. "If I die, this city burns with me." Bairov roared, his eyes glowing with suicidal madness. He plunged his hands into his own chest. He was going to manually detonate his golden core. The resulting explosion would wipe Kolkata off the map, leaving nothing but a radioactive wasteland of chaotic prana. Aarav's cognitive multiplier rapidly calculated the blast radius. He couldn't run. He couldn't punch a shockwave. He needed something that could instantly erase the energy entirely. He closed his eyes and reached into his digital inventory, pulling up the fragmented blueprint of the Indra Dart he had won at the tournament. It's not the Indra Dart, Aarav thought, visualizing the complex, apocalyptic code of the Brahmashira Astra system. I cannot summon the full weapon. I will die. Calculate the exact frequency to manifest a single spark of the Astra using my 10x cognitive processor. Warning, attempting to process Supreme Tier Maha Astra, Brahmashira, dot. Host cognitive processor, 10x, is straining, filtering cosmic code. Isolating a single spark. Success. Aarav opened his eyes. He didn't take a stance. He simply held up his index finger. At the tip of his finger, a tiny, impossibly dense point of white light materialized. It made no sound. It gave off no heat. But the moment it appeared, the ambient prana in the entire city stopped moving. Reality itself seemed to hold its breath in sheer terror. Bairov looked up from his glowing, detonating chest. He stared at the speck of light on Aarav's finger, and for the first time in his life, his soul experienced true, absolute dread. What is that?" Bairov whispered. "Checkmate," Aarav replied. Aarav flicked his finger. The spark of the Brahmashira traveled the 50 feet between them instantly. It didn't explode when it hit Aarav. It simply bypassed his physical body, bypassed his aura, and struck the detonating Surya Chakra directly. The supreme cosmic code of the Astra overwrote the golden core's reality. The massive, city-destroying explosion Aarav was building simply collapsed inward. It was erased. Unwritten. Aarav opened his mouth to scream, but the erasure spread from his core to his body. In absolute silence, the warlord disintegrated into fine white ash, scattering into the night wind. Aarav lowered his hand. The white light faded. The courtyard was dead silent, save for the groans of the surviving cadets. Aarav looked down at his own hand. The skin on his index finger was charred black, a permanent reminder of the supreme power he had just brushed against. He had changed history. He had saved the city, crushed the syndicate, and unlocked a system that defied the heavens. And yet, looking up at the violet-tinged sky, Aarav knew this was just the beginning. The Asuras on Earth were dead, but the true cosmic players in the higher realms had just felt the spark of a Maha-Astra. They would be coming for him. And next time, 10x wouldn't be enough. Chapter 23, The General's Bargain. The ash of the Warlord hadn't even settled before the floodlights hit Aarav. Military helicopters, heavy with reinforced armor plating and glowing blue yantras, swarmed the sky above the ruined Kolkata Central Courtyard. Red laser sights painted Aarav's chest. 100 elite prana-infused soldiers fast-roped from the choppers, leveling their rifles at him. They hadn't seen Aarav's near ascension. They only saw a lone, blood-soaked cadet standing in the center of a crater, surrounded by the decimated corpses of the military's finest. "Stand down and retract your prana aura," a voice boomed over a megaphone. "Get on your knees, cadet." Aarav didn't move. He looked at his charred index finger, then slowly raised his head. His eyes, burning with the residual, terrifying clarity of the 10x cognitive multiplier, locked onto the lead helicopter. He didn't shout. He simply adjusted the acoustic frequency of his voice using a fraction of his energy, making his words resonate directly inside the eardrums of every soldier present. "If I wanted you dead," Aarav's voice echoed in their skulls, smooth and utterly devoid of fear, "your helicopters would already be scrap metal in the Hooghly. Lower your weapons and bring me General Khanna. We have a lot of work to do." A tense silence fell over the courtyard. From the shadows of the ruined barracks, Devansh the Suryavanshi prodigy limped forward. He stepped between Aarav and the soldiers, raising his hands. "Stand down." Devansh yelled, his voice cracking. "He killed the warlord. He stopped the golden core detonation. He is something else entirely." 10 minutes later, the courtyard was secured. Aarav sat on a broken concrete pillar, calmly drinking water from a canteen. Approaching him was General Khanna, Supreme Commander of the Eastern Command. Khanna was a hardened veteran, a man who possessed a heavy, stable prana sanchaya foundation of his own. But as he looked at Aarav, the general felt a primal, instinctual dread. The boy didn't feel human, he felt like a compressed star. The sensors detected an energy spike that defied all known physics, General Khanna said, keeping a respectful distance. For a microsecond, the command bunker thought a nuclear warhead had detonated in the courtyard. "What exactly are you, Aarav?" "I am the weapon you thought you were building," Aarav replied, tossing the empty canteen aside. "Aarav is dead. The local cartel is broken. But what I just did, it was loud. The cosmic frequency of that strike wasn't just felt in this city. The higher realms felt it. The Devas know we exist now." General Khanna's brow furrowed. "The Devas? Gods? You're telling me mythological deities are real and they're coming here?" "They aren't gods. They are just cultivators who reached the immortal realm and closed the door behind them," Aarav stated coldly. "And they do not like mortals playing with their fire. In my calculations, Earth has roughly 72 hours before a celestial scout arrives to investigate the anomaly." "What do you need?" Khanna asked instantly, realizing the boy wasn't crazy. He was a prophet of war. "Total access to the Fort William vault. Every spirit stone, every rare herb, every ancient scroll you've hoarded since the Prana Burst," Aarav demanded. "I am at the absolute peak of my current realm. I need to break through to Kundalini Jagran, Foundation Establishment, tonight." Khanna nodded slowly. "Done. But if you survive this breakthrough, you answer directly to me. We build a specialized strike team around you." "Deal," Aarav said. He stood up. The true war was about to begin. Chapter 24, The Eye of Swarga. Far beyond the physical confines of Earth, beyond the solar system and the vacuum of space, existed the higher dimensional plane of Swarga, the heavenly realm. Here, the air was made of liquid gold, and the mountains were carved from singular, massive diamonds. Time flowed differently. 1,000 years on Earth was but a passing afternoon in the courts of the Celestials. In the obsidian watchtower of the eastern sector, a being of pure, blinding light opened its eyes. This was Vyadhyut, a Vidyadhara, a lesser celestial enforcer. He possessed wings of condensed lightning and a cultivation base that sat comfortably at the peak of the nascent soul stage. To him, mortals were barely sentient apes. Vyadhyut stared at a massive, crystalline map of the lower dimensions. The sector labeled Earth a mud ball that had been cut off from spiritual energy for 5,000 years was flashing with a terrifying, supreme white light. "The Brahmashira," Vyadhyut whispered, his voice sounding like grinding tectonic plates. "Impossible. A mortal insect cannot manifest the supreme code. They would disintegrate." Even I would disintegrate. He reached out, touching the flashing rune on the map. The sensory data flooded his mind. No, Viadihud realized, his glowing eyes narrowing in disgust. It wasn't a full manifestation. It was a fragment. A glitch. A mortal has somehow hijacked the cosmic laws. This was unacceptable. The Dharma, cosmic order, strictly dictated that supreme power belonged only to the divine. If the other factions in Swarga discovered a mortal playing with a Mahastra, it would cause a political uproar. Viadihud stood up, unfurling his lightning wings. He didn't need to inform his superiors. He would descend, incinerate the ape who dared touch the fire of the gods, wipe the city off the map to cover the tracks, and return before dinner. He stepped into the void. Chapter 25, Awakening the Serpent. Deep beneath Fort William in Kolkata, in a bunker designed to survive a nuclear holocaust, Aarav sat perfectly still. The room was filled with millions of dollars worth of military hoarded cultivation resources. Crates of condensed prana cores, vials of liquid moonlight, Chandra Amrita, and ancient, humming yantras surrounded him. Aarav didn't use them one by one. System, Aarav commanded. Engage prana vacuum. X10 multiplier. The room violently imploded with spiritual pressure. The crates shattered. The vials exploded. A localized tornado of pure, raw energy formed in the bunker, funneling directly into Aarav's open mouth and pores. His Vajra skeleton groaned under the pressure, and his Raktasoma-enhanced veins bulged, glowing a furious, blinding blue through his skin. He was at the absolute limit of prana sanchaya, chi condensation. To reach the next realm, he couldn't just gather more energy, he had to change its state. He had to force the massive ocean of prana down to the Muladhara, root chakra, at the base of his spine, and awaken the dormant, coiled energy of the kundalini. Push, Aarav gritted his teeth, his 10x cognitive processor precisely directing the chaotic storm of energy downward. When the condensed prana hit the base of his spine, it felt like swallowing a live grenade. The kundalini energy often described in ancient texts as a sleeping serpent violently awoke. But because of Aarav's X10 multiplier, it didn't just awaken, it detonated. A torrent of liquid, golden fire shot upward through the sushumna, the central channel of the spine. Warning, extreme spinal trauma detected. Kundalini ascent initiated, piercing the chakras. Aarav screamed, his back arching as the energy violently pierced his sacral, solar, and heart chakras in milliseconds. With every pierced chakra, his mortal limitations shattered. He didn't just feel stronger. He felt untethered. The heavy pull of Earth's gravity simply ceased to exist for him. He began to levitate, floating 3 feet off the bunker floor as the golden energy finally reached his Sahasrara, crown chakra, exploding outward in a halo of divine light. Realm advance, Kundalini Jagran, foundation establishment, achieved. Host physiology transitioned, demi-spiritual entity. Passive abilities unlocked, flight, telekinesis, mantraless elemental projection. Aarav opened his eyes. They no longer had whites or irises, they were pools of calm, glowing azure energy. He raised a finger, and without a single word or physical movement, a crate across the room quietly disintegrated into ash. He had done it. He had achieved in one night what took orthodox geniuses a century. Suddenly, the reinforced steel ceiling of the bunker began to melt, dripping like hot wax. Aarav slowly looked up. 72 hours, Aarav muttered, floating gently to the floor. The Celestial Express is running early. Chapter 26, The Arrogance of Heaven. The roof of the bunker completely caved in. Viadihut, the Vidyadhara, descended through the molten steel, his wings of lightning illuminating the subterranean chamber. He looked down his nose at Aarav, his glowing face twisted in a mixture of awe and absolute disgust. A newly birthed foundation insect, Viadihut's voice crackled with ozone. Yet you reek of the Brahmashira. Explain this glitch, ape. How did you manifest the supreme code? Aarav dusted off his military cargo pants. He looked at the celestial not with fear, but with the cold, calculating gaze of a scientist examining a bug. I didn't manifest it, Aarav replied calmly. I mathematically extracted a single, optimized variable of its acoustic frequency and weaponized it. I essentially pirated your god's software. Viadihut's eyes widened in fury. The blasphemy was incomprehensible. You dare, the celestial roared. I am an emissary of Swarga. I have cultivated for 4,000 years. I will burn your soul to cinders and erase this entire continent. Viadihut raised his hand, summoning a massive spear of crackling, white-hot celestial lightning. He threw it directly at Aarav's chest. The speed of the attack was incredible, far surpassing anything the Warlord had ever attempted. It was a true nascent soul-level strike. If this had been yesterday, Aarav would have been vaporized. But today, Aarav was a foundation establishment cultivator. And he had a cheat code. System, Aarav thought. Sync all multipliers. 10x physical, 10x prana, 10x cognitive. Total synergy activated. Ananta protocol overdrive. To Aarav's newly ascended mind, the lightning spear seemed to freeze in midair. He didn't dodge. He simply raised his hand and exerted his newly unlocked telekinesis, multiplied by 10. The space in front of Aarav violently warped. The celestial lightning spear hit the telekinetic wall and shattered into harmless sparks, the kinetic backlash blowing out the remaining walls of the bunker. Viadihut froze, his celestial arrogance cracking instantly. What kind of foundation realm is this? You parried a heavenly strike with a thought. Aarav slowly levitated into the air until he was exactly eye level with the glowing celestial. The azure fire of his aura flared, completely engulfing the room and suffocating the celestial's light. You spent 4,000 years meditating on a mountain to get that power, Aarav whispered, his voice echoing with terrifying, multiplied resonance. I did the math in an afternoon. Now, let me show you what a modern mortal can do with your fire. Aarav vanished. Not with speed, but with sheer, overwhelming force. Before Viadihud could even blink, Aarav appeared directly in front of him. Aarav's Vajra-dense fist, wrapped in multiplied golden kundalini energy, buried itself deep into the celestial's glowing stomach. The impact sounded like a dying star. The celestial enforcer coughed up golden blood, his eyes bulging in sheer agony as he was launched upward, smashing through the remaining layers of the underground bunker and erupting into the night sky over Kolkata. Aarav shot out of the crater after him, flying into the open air. The hunting season had officially changed. The prey was now the predator. Chapter 27, The Gravity of Mortals. The night sky over Kolkata was illuminated not by streetlights, but by the violent clash of two ascending gods. Viadihud, the celestial enforcer, stabilized himself 2,000 feet in the air, his lightning wings violently thrashing to arrest his momentum. He wiped a streak of glowing, golden blood from his chin. His celestial armor, forged in the fires of Swarga, possessed a massive, spider-webbed dent exactly in the shape of Aarav's fist. You hit like a beast, Viadihud snarled, his voice booming like rolling thunder across the sleeping city. But you are still bound by the dirt you were born on. Viadihud raised both hands to the sky. Warning, massive ambient energy displacement detected. Enemy is utilizing domain-level law manipulation. The clouds above them violently spiraled, turning a sickly, glowing purple. Viadihud wasn't just summoning a lightning bolt, he was calling upon the Viadihutastra, the lightning mandate, a localized manipulation of atmospheric physics. Thousands of jagged, white-hot bolts of lightning rained down simultaneously, turning the airspace into a localized blender of plasma. Aarav hovered in the center of the storm, his azure kundalini aura flaring like a beacon. System, Aarav commanded, his mind as calm as a frozen lake. Activate Cognitive Multiplier X10. Map the strike vectors. To Aarav, the chaotic, blinding storm of lightning slowed to a crawl. His Tier 2 cognitive processor analyzed the atmospheric pressure, the ionization of the air, and the exact geometric pathways the celestial bolts were taking. It wasn't magic, it was just violent electricity following the path of least resistance. Aarav didn't dodge. He moved through the storm. Agility Multiplier X10 synchronized. He flew upward, threading the needle through microscopic gaps in the lightning grid. When a bolt was unavoidable, Aarav used his X10 telekinesis to slightly bend the surrounding air pressure, forcing the lightning to curve harmlessly past his shoulders. He was dancing through the apocalypse. Viadihud watched in absolute horror as the mortal simply wove through his ultimate attack without a single burn. My turn, Aarav's voice echoed right next to Viadihud's ear. The celestial spun around, bringing his arms up to guard. Aarav delivered a roundhouse kick directly to Viadihud's ribs. The X10 physical multiplier, backed by the unbreakable density of his Vajra skeleton, struck with the force of a falling meteor. Viadihud's ribs shattered. He was launched horizontally across the sky, breaking the sound barrier twice as he skipped off the clouds like a skipped stone. Chapter 28, The Astral Severing. Viadihud tumbled through the air, his physical body utterly broken. His internal organs were ruptured, and his nadis, energy channels, were collapsing under the kinetic trauma. A foundation stage mortal was beating a nascent soul celestial to death with pure, brute physics. It was a cosmic impossibility. Flesh is weakness. Viadihud screamed in desperation, arresting his fall. I am eternal. The celestial closed his eyes and performed a rapid, one-handed mudra. His physical body suddenly went completely limp, dropping toward the city below like a discarded rag. But from the forehead of the falling body, a blinding, pure white entity stepped out. It was Viadihud's Sukshma Sharira, his nascent soul. Stripped of his physical vessel, Viadihud was now a being of pure, concentrated spiritual energy. In this form, he was immune to physical kinetic strikes. A punch that could level a mountain would simply pass through him. You cannot punch a soul, ape, the nascent Viadihud shrieked, instantly teleporting directly in front of Aarav. The celestial plunged his glowing, spectral hands directly into Aarav's head. He was bypassing the physical skull entirely, attempting to directly shred Aarav's consciousness and devour his soul. Alert, hostile spiritual invasion detected. Enemy nascent soul attempting to overwrite host's neural matrix. For a mortal, this was instant death. The mind of a nascent soul cultivator was a vast, ancient ocean, a foundation cultivator's mind was a puddle. But Aarav's mind was no longer mortal. He had the Ahamkara Sphatika, the ego crystal, fused into his brain, multiplying his cognitive architecture by 10. Aarav didn't panic. He simply closed his eyes. Inside Aarav's mindscape, Viadihud expected to find a fragile, terrified mortal soul. Instead, he found himself standing in a cold, infinite void composed of endlessly shifting geometric yantras and towering walls of digital, azure code. Where is your soul? Viadihud demanded, his spectral form flickering in the oppressive atmosphere. You stepped into a supercomputer, Viadihud, Aarav's voice resonated from every direction at once. Initiating countermeasure, cognitive crush. Multiplier X10. The digital walls of Aarav's mindscape slammed shut. The sheer processing power of Aarav's brain descended upon the Celestial's nascent soul like a hydraulic press. Viadihut screamed as his ancient, 4,000-year-old memories, his ego, and his spiritual energy were violently decrypted, broken down into raw data, and assimilated. No. The heavens will burn you. The Devis will Viadihut's voice cut off abruptly as his nascent soul was crushed into a single, glowing drop of pure celestial liquid. In the physical world, Aarav opened his eyes. The white spectral entity was gone. Aarav exhaled a long breath, a faint wisp of white, celestial energy escaping his lips. Nascent soul consumed. Massive spiritual energy stored in core. Realm stabilized at peak foundation establishment. Chapter 29, The Spoils of Heaven. Aarav dove down, intercepting Viadihut's falling physical body before it could crush a residential block. He landed heavily on a deserted highway overpass on the outskirts of Kolkata, dropping the lifeless celestial corpse onto the asphalt. He didn't waste time. He stripped a golden, intricately carved ring off the celestial's finger, a spatial ring, capable of holding dimensional storage. A minute later, the roaring blades of military helicopters descended upon the overpass. General Khanna stepped out of the lead chopper, flanked by heavily armed, prana-shielded elite guards. The general stopped in his tracks, staring at the winged, glowing corpse on the highway. Is that? Khanna breathed, his eyes wide. A scout. A Vidyadhara, Aarav said, tossing the celestial's golden ring up and catching it in his palm. His physical density was roughly 3 times that of a modern tank, and his soul projection could have wiped the minds of this entire city. General Khanna swallowed hard. You killed a god. I killed a foot soldier, General, Aarav corrected him, his tone deadly serious. In Swarga, a Vidyadhara is just a border guard. When a scout fails to report back, they don't send another scout. They send a battalion. We have provoked the immortal realm. Khanna looked at Aarav, realizing the terrifying scale of the war they had just entered. The Vatra scheme academies, they aren't enough, are they? These kids are learning to throw fireballs. They can't fight that. No, they can't, Aarav agreed. Which is why the Vatra scheme is officially dead. Aarav walked up to the general, his azure eyes glowing with a terrifying, calculated ambition. I am going to reverse engineer this spatial ring and the data I just stripped from his soul, Aarav declared. We aren't building an army of low-level grunts anymore. We are going to build the Ananta Sampradaya, the infinite sect. I need your top 100 cadets. Not the strongest, but the smartest. What are you going to do with them? Khanna asked. Aarav smiled, tapping the side of his own head. I'm going to figure out how to mass-produce my system. If the heavens want to send an army, I'll give them an army of multipliers to fight. Chapter 30, The Celestial Cache. Deep within the subterranean command center of Fort William, Aarav sat cross-legged at a steel conference table. The golden, intricately carved ring he had stripped from the celestial scout, Viadihut, rested in the center of the table. General Khanna and a team of top military cryptographers stood behind reinforced glass, watching intently. Standard prana scanning shows nothing, the lead cryptographer spoke through the intercom. It registers as ordinary gold. The spatial dimension is locked behind a spiritual firewall we can't even comprehend, let alone breach. Aarav didn't look up. That's because it's not a lock you pick with tools. It's a lock you pick with pure ahamkara ego and authority. You have to convince the ring that you are its master. Aarav closed his eyes. Cognitive multiplier X10 activated. Simulating celestial neural signature. Aarav didn't just push his prana into the ring, he reshaped his spiritual frequency to perfectly mimic the data he had crushed and assimilated from Viadihut's nascent soul. He projected an aura of absolute, arrogant celestial authority. The ring clicked. A holographic projection of pure white light erupted from the band, expanding into a 3-dimensional inventory grid that hovered above the table. The military cryptographers gasped. The storage space was massive, roughly the size of an aircraft hangar compressed into a single piece of jewelry. Inside were neatly stacked rows of perfectly cut, glowing blue stones, high-grade spirit stones, racks of celestial weapons, and hundreds of glowing golden scrolls. But Aarav's eyes immediately locked onto a single, pulsing crimson sphere floating in the center of the inventory. He reached into the hologram and physically pulled the sphere out of the projection. As it touched his palm, the sphere dissolved into a stream of data that shot directly into his mind. Intercepting celestial mandate, deciphering Swargatir code. Aarav's expression, usually as calm as a frozen lake, darkened. The azure fire around his body flared uncontrollably, cracking the reinforced glass separating him from the generals. What is it, Aarav? General Khanna asked, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm. The Prana Burst, Aarav whispered, his voice dangerously low. It wasn't a cosmic accident. It wasn't an anomaly. He waved his hand, projecting the data from the crimson sphere onto the military monitors. A sprawling map of the galaxy appeared, with Earth highlighted in a pulsing red target. Swarga deliberately opened the dimensional valve to Earth, Aarav explained, his voice laced with cold fury. For 5,000 years, they starved this planet of spiritual energy. But immortal lifespans require fuel. The heavens are running low on pure soul energy. They triggered the Prana Burst to forcibly awaken humanity's chakras. General Khanna turned pale. Why? To fatten us up, Aarav said flatly. We aren't a rogue anomaly. Earth is a farm. The mandate dictates that once enough mortals reach the Prana Sanchaya, chi condensation, stage, the celestial fleet will descend. They aren't coming to conquer us. They are coming for a harvest. Chapter 31, The Network of the Infinite. 2 days later, the ruins of the Kolkata Central Courtyard had been cleared. In the center of the parade ground stood 100 of the highest testing cadets from across the Eastern Command. They were the smartest, most adaptable minds the Vajra scheme had produced. Among them stood Devansh, his pride completely tempered by the horrors he had survived. Aarav stood on a raised concrete dais before them. He wasn't wearing a military uniform, just a simple black combat shirt and cargo pants. But to the cadets, his presence was heavier than a mountain. Look at the sky, Aarav commanded. The 100 cadets looked up. The sky was a hazy blue, but with their newly awakened prana, they could feel an oppressive, heavy pressure descending from the upper atmosphere. That is the weight of the harvest, Aarav said, his voice echoing clearly across the courtyard without the need for a microphone. The celestial realm views you as crops. If you cultivate using standard breathing techniques, by the time their fleet arrives in 3 months, you might if you are lucky be strong enough to polish their boots. Murmurs of panic rippled through the ranks. Silence, Aarav commanded. The air pressure in the courtyard instantly dropped, silencing the cadets. The orthodox path is dead. To fight a networked, ancient celestial army, we must become something they cannot comprehend. We must become a hive. Aarav held up his hand. Hovering above his palm was a highly complex, glowing blue yantra, a geometric matrix composed of thousands of lines of spiritual code. I possess a unique cognitive architecture, Aarav explained carefully, hiding the true origins of the Ananta protocol. I have mathematically isolated the laws of cultivation. I have created a subsystem. A digital tether. He expanded the hologram. I will surgically etch this yantra directly into your Ajna chakra, the third eye. It will link your prana network directly to mine. You will become nodes in the Ananta Sampradaya. I will act as the central server. By borrowing my cognitive processing power, your physical and spiritual output will be multiplied. Devansh stepped forward, his eyes locked on the glowing matrix. Multiplied by how much? A standard 2x multiplier to base physical kinetic force and prana absorption, Aarav replied. Any higher, and your unrefined mortal bones will detonate. But a 2x multiplier means you learn twice as fast, hit twice as hard, and process combat geometry at twice the speed of a normal human. Aarav looked over the 100 cadets. This is not standard cultivation. The etching process will feel like someone is driving a molten nail into your skull. If your ego fights the connection, your mind will shatter. Do I have volunteers? Devansh didn't hesitate. He walked up the steps of the dais and knelt before Aarav. My clan failed to protect this city, Devansh said, his voice resolute. Make me a weapon. Chapter 32, Node 001. Aarav drew a needle forged from the Vajrabhasma, lightning ash, he had harvested from the skyscraper. It crackled with contained, surgical electricity. Close your eyes, Devansh. Do not resist the code, Aarav ordered. Aarav placed his left hand on the back of Devansh's head to stabilize him. With his right hand, guided by the flawless precision of his cognitive multiplier X10, Aarav pressed the lightning needle directly to the center of Devansh's forehead. Subsystem protocol initiated. Forging neural tether to target, Devansh _ Suryavancha. The moment the needle pierced the skin, Devansh screamed. It wasn't just physical pain. Aarav was forcibly writing digital cosmic code into the boy's soul. The azure fire of Aarav's prana cascaded down the needle, forcefully carving the geometric yantra into Devansh's Ajna chakra. The cadets in the courtyard watched in terrified silence as Devansh's veins bulged black and blue. The air around him superheated, his latent solar energy fighting the invasive code. Yield to the network. Aarav commanded, his voice a booming, resonant frequency that shook Devansh's bones. Your ego is useless here. Drop it. Devansh gasped, forcing his ahamkara down. He surrendered his pride. The resistance instantly vanished. The yantra sank completely into Devansh's skin, leaving a permanent, faint blue geometric tattoo on his forehead. Aarav withdrew the needle. Devansh collapsed forward, catching himself on his hands and knees, panting heavily. For a moment, there was silence. Then, Devansh slowly raised his head. His eyes were wide with absolute shock. In his peripheral vision, a translucent blue interface had appeared. Ananta tether established. Designation, Node 001. Server link, active. Passive buff applied, 2x physical, 2x prana output. Devansh looked at his hands. He slowly clenched his right fist. Without him even needing to concentrate, the ambient prana in the air rushed into his nadis at exactly double his normal rate. He punched the concrete floor of the dais. Crack. The concrete shattered into a fine powder under his fist. He felt absolutely zero recoil. His mind was icy, precise, calculating the exact kinetic output of the strike before he had even thrown it. Devansh looked up at Aarav, awe overriding his exhaustion. I can see the math. I can see the flow of the world. Aarav nodded, wiping a bead of sweat from his own brow. Forging a node took a massive toll on his own processing power, but it worked. He looked out at the remaining 99 cadets. They were no longer terrified. Seeing Devansh shatter the concrete with a casual strike, their eyes burned with hunger. Line up, Aarav ordered. We have an army to build. Chapter 33, The Hive Mind Awakening. It took 14 hours to etch all 100 cadets. By the time Aarav withdrew the Vajrabhasma needle from the forehead of Node 100, the sun had fully risen over Kolkata. Aarav's physical body, despite his massive Rocktosome reserves, was trembling slightly. Acting as the central processor for 100 newly awakened spiritual tethers was like keeping 100 high-end combat simulations running in his brain simultaneously. But his cognitive multiplier X10 held the network stable. The courtyard of Fort William was eerily silent. The 100 cadets stood in perfect, rigid formation. They weren't panting. They weren't shifting their weight. The faint blue geometric yantras on their foreheads pulsed in perfect synchronization with Aarav's own heartbeat. General Canis stood on the observation deck, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of his neck. They aren't acting like teenagers anymore, Cana whispered to his adjutant. They aren't even acting human. Aarav stood on the dais, closing his eyes. He didn't speak out loud. Instead, he sent a single, encrypted command down the neural tether. NGT server command, execute form 4, defensive phalanx. 0 prana emission. In the exact same microsecond, all 100 cadets moved. There was no hesitation, no looking around to see what the person next to them was doing. They drew their yantra-edged tactical blades and shifted into a flawless, interlocking defensive perimeter. The sound of their boots hitting the concrete was a single, unified crack that echoed like a gunshot. Devansh, Node 001, stood at the apex. His eyes were wide with a terrifying clarity. How does it feel? Aarav asked aloud. Perfect, Devansh replied, his voice devoid of its usual arrogant edge. I know exactly where everyone is. I know their blind spots. I don't have to guess. The math is just, there. The 2x multiplier removes human hesitation. It optimizes your kinetic output by forcing your brain to process the geometry of combat perfectly, Aarav explained, walking down the steps of the dais. But this is just the foundation. If Swarga sends an army, perfect martial arts won't save you. You need to learn how to combine your prana into a single, localized Divya Astra. Aarav stopped in front of the formation. For the next 30 days, you do not sleep. You do not eat mortal food. You will subsist entirely on the condensed prana cores we took from the Celestial's ring, Aarav commanded. We are going to break the limits of Foundation establishment. By the time the harvest fleet arrives, I want 100 golden cores. Chapter 34, The Obsidian Court. Far beyond the veil of Earth's atmosphere, in the highest reaches of Swarga, the sky was a permanent, blazing gold. The Obsidian Court of the eastern heavens was a sprawling palace carved from the heart of a dead star. Inside the grand hall, thousands of lesser celestials knelt in absolute silence. At the end of the hall sat General Vaitranabha, a high celestial at the absolute peak of the spirit-severing domain, realm. He wore armor forged from the compressed gravity of black holes. His aura was so dense that the light in the room literally bent toward him, unable to escape his gravitational pull. Hovering in front of Vaitranabha was a shattered piece of jade. It was Vidyad's life slip. A Vidyadhara scout was deployed to Sector 4 the Mortal Farm, Vaitranabha spoke, his voice vibrating with the terrifying frequency of a cosmic earthquake. His life slip shattered less than an hour after he breached the atmospheric veil. He was completely erased. Not even his nascent soul escaped. A murmur of panic rippled through the kneeling celestials. A nascent soul destroyed on Earth? The planet had been starved of prana for 5 millennia. It was mathematically impossible for a mortal to kill a god. Silence, Vaitranabha commanded. The air pressure in the room spiked, forcing the celestials to press their faces against the diamond floor. The Prana Burst was meant to fatten the apes, but it seems one of them has found a way to gorge himself on the trough, Vaitranabha said, his eyes narrowing into slits of blinding white light. A glitch in the Dharma. A weed that has grown too fast. Vaitranabha stood up. The sheer weight of his movement cracked the obsidian floor. The harvest is accelerated, the general declared. Prepare the Vimanas, celestial warships. Awaken the Ashtadikpalas, the 8 guardians of the directions. We will not wait 3 months. We leave within the lunar cycle. We will descend upon this mud ball, extract their souls, and burn the planet to cinder to ensure this anomaly never repeats. Chapter 35, The Smog Makara. Day 14 of the Ananta Protocol. The emergency sirens at the Farrakha Barrage, a massive dam spanning the Ganges River, blared into the night. The sudden influx of spiritual energy on Earth hadn't just affected humans. Animals and the environment itself were mutating violently. A massive surge of tamasic, polluted/dark, prana from the industrial sectors had drifted into the river, violently mutating an apex predator. A Makara, a mythological aquatic beast resembling a massive, armored crocodile, had breached the dam's lower retaining walls. It was 80 feet long, its scales composed of hardened, toxic smog and river sludge. With every thrash of its tail, it unleashed a shockwave of localized water pressure that shattered the concrete infrastructure. If the dam broke, the resulting flood, laced with toxic tamasic energy, would wipe out hundreds of downstream villages. The local military battalions were falling back. Their standard prana-infused bullets were bouncing off the Makara's smog scales like pebbles. Fall back! It's charging an elemental strike, a captain screamed into his radio. The Makara reared up, its massive jaws opening to reveal a swirling vortex of high-pressurized, toxic water. Suddenly, the night sky above the dam tore open. 3 heavily modified military transport planes roared overhead. From the open cargo bays, 100 black-clad figures dropped simultaneously into the night. They wore no parachutes. NGT server command, node sync 100%. Activate terminal velocity impact. Aarav stood on the highest tower of the dam, his arms crossed, watching the battlefield through the neural tether. He didn't need to fight this beast. This was a test for his army. The 100 cadets plummeted toward the beast. At exactly 50 feet above the target, Devansh, Node 001, sent a sub-command through the network. NGT Node 001 command, ignite solar aura. Form the spear. In perfect synchronization, all 100 cadets ignited their prana. Because their yantras linked their energy channels, they didn't fall as 100 individuals, they fell as a single, perfectly unified kinetic weapon. Their overlapping auras fused together, forming a massive, 60-foot spear of blinding, condensed Agni, fire, energy. The Makara looked up, its reptilian eyes widening in terror. The 100 cadets hit the beast simultaneously. The 2x physical multiplier of 100 Foundation Establishment cultivators, focused into a single geometric point, was catastrophic. The impact instantly evaporated the Makara's toxic water vortex. The massive spear of combined prana pierced the beast's impenetrable smog armor, driving straight through its skull and pinning its 80-foot body to the riverbed. The resulting shockwave of steam and kinetic force cleared the fog for a mile in every direction. When the steam cleared, the beast was dead. The 100 cadets stood in a perfect circle around the carcass, their breathing steady, their blue yantras pulsing rhythmically. From the command tower, Aarav looked down at his hive mind. They had executed a perfectly synchronized, multi-tier elemental strike with 0 verbal communication and 0 casualties. Network status, optimal. Cadet progression, 60% toward golden core threshold. Aarav looked up at the stars, a cold, predatory smile crossing his face. Let the heavens accelerate their plans. The Ananta sect was learning how to hunt. Chapter 36, The Solar Crucible. Day 28 of the Ananta Protocol. The subterranean bunker of Fort William had been completely hollowed out, transformed into a massive, geometric yantra spanning 3 football fields. At the center of the array sat Aarav. Radiating outward from him in a perfect lotus pattern were the 100 cadets of the Ananta sect. The air was so saturated with spiritual energy that it had become a thick, glowing mist. Millions of high-grade celestial spirit stones stolen from Viadayut's spatial ring had been pulverized into dust and painted into the floor to fuel the array. The lunar cycle ends in 48 hours, Aarav's voice echoed through the neural tether, bypassing their ears entirely. The celestial fleet is already breaching the outer atmospheric wards. I can feel their dimensional drag. It is time to forge the core. Forging a Surya Chakra, golden core, was the deadliest bottleneck in cultivation. A practitioner had to forcefully compress their massive ocean of liquid prana into a single, hyperdense crystalline star within their danshan. A single mistake in pressure resulted in a localized biological detonation that would wipe out a city block. 100 people doing it simultaneously was considered mathematical suicide. But they had a multiplier. NGT server command, initiate core condensation. Network sync at 100%. In perfect unison, all 100 cadets began the compression sequence. The temperature in the bunker spiked instantly. The heat was apocalyptic, turning the concrete floor into glowing slag. Devansh, Node 001, felt his internal prana fighting back, violently expanding against the walls of his nadis. The pain was blinding. His ego screamed at him to stop, to let the energy vent before he exploded. NGT node error detected, prana destabilization in Node 012, Node 044, Node 089. NGT server action, rerouting excess thermal pressure. Stabilizing. Aarav, sitting at the center, acted as the ultimate heatsink. His 10x cognitive multiplier processed the exact internal pressure of all 100 cadets simultaneously. When one cadet's core threatened to crack, Aarav siphoned the excess pressure through the neural tether, absorbing the lethal backlash with his unbreakable Vajra skeleton. Do not fight the pressure. Compress. Aarav commanded, blood dripping from his own nose as his processor reached critical load. A blinding flash of golden light erupted from Devansh's chest. A second later, another flash. Then another. Like a chain of supernovas, the flashes rippled through the bunker. The ambient mist of prana was instantly vacuumed into their bodies. When the light faded, the 100 cadets opened their eyes. There was no cheering. There was no gasping for breath. The 100 teenagers simply stood up, hovering 2 inches off the slagged floor. They had successfully forged 100 flawless golden cores. Their combined aura was a towering pillar of golden fire that pierced straight through the ceiling of the bunker and shot into the night sky. Chapter 37, The Singularity Core. With the cadets stabilized, Aarav dismissed them to the surface to prepare with General Khanna's conventional forces. Aarav remained alone in the glowing, subterranean crater. It was his turn. Aarav was at the absolute peak of Kundalini Jagran, Foundation establishment. But his foundation was monstrous. He had a 10x prana capacity, fueled by the mutated Raktasoma, and he had devoured the nascent soul of a 4,000-year-old celestial scout. If a normal cultivator's liquid prana was a lake, Aarav's was a violently boiling ocean. System, Aarav thought. If I compress this volume of prana into a standard golden core, what is the survival probability? Calculating. Warning, a standard Surya Chakra cannot contain the host's energy volume multiplied by 10. Attempting standard condensation will result in catastrophic host biological erasure. Aarav smiled grimly. A normal golden core would shatter trying to hold his power. He couldn't build a star. He had to build a black hole. System, Aarav whispered, his eyes glowing azure in the dark. Don't stop the compression at the solid state. Keep going. Crush it until the physics break. Initiating protocol, Singularity Core. Warning, extreme danger to host soul matrix. Applying cognitive X10 to manage dimensional collapse, Aarav closed his eyes and began to condense his ocean of prana. The process didn't generate heat or light like the cadets. It generated sheer, terrifying gravity. The molten slag on the floor began to float upward, drawn toward Aarav's chest. The reinforced steel pillars of the bunker groaned and bent inward. Aarav forced the massive, swirling galaxy of his internal energy into a sphere the size of a grapefruit, then a golf ball, then a marble. His Vajra skeleton cracked under his own internal gravitational pull. More, Aarav grunted, blood pouring from his eyes. He compressed the energy down to a microscopic pinpoint. The density became so extreme that it tore a microscopic hole in the fabric of his own danshan. The azure prana didn't solidify into a golden core, it collapsed entirely, forming a terrifying, light-devouring sphere of pure void energy. Realm Advance, Singularity Core, Variant, Surya Chakra, achieved. Host physiology transitioned, gravitational anomaly. New passive unlocked, void consumption. Aarav opened his eyes. The world looked incredibly fragile. He felt that if he punched the air with a 10x multiplier now, he wouldn't just create a shockwave, he would shatter the dimensional space itself. He looked up at the ceiling. The timer was up. Chapter 38, The Sky Cracks Day 30. At noon, the sun over Kolkata stopped moving. Millions of citizens poured into the streets, looking up in sheer terror. The sky didn't darken, it turned a blinding, oppressive gold. The clouds were violently pushed aside by a massive, geometric displacement of air. Then, the Vimanas descended. They were celestial dreadnoughts, massive, floating cities of white marble and gold, hovering in the stratosphere. They defied all aerodynamics, remaining airborne through the sheer, brute force application of domain-level yantras. From the central dreadnought, a voice boomed. It wasn't broadcast over speakers, it was projected telepathically into the minds of every human within a 500-mile radius. Mortals of Sector 4. The harvest has arrived. Surrender your prana, and your physical vessel shall be spared. Resist, and you shall be returned to ash. On the ground, panic erupted. The military scrambled fighter jets, but as the jets breached a certain altitude, they simply lost all power and fell from the sky. Their engines suppressed by the sheer spiritual pressure of the celestial fleet. Standing on the roof of the Fort William Command Center, General Kanna watched the descending gods through a pair of binoculars, his hands shaking. They brought an armada, Kanna whispered. Aarav, what do we do? Aarav stood at the edge of the roof, his hands in his pockets. Behind him stood the 100 cadets of the Ananta sect, perfectly silent, their blue forward yantras glowing faintly. We teach them math, Aarav said. Aarav sent a command through the neural tether. NGT server command, node sync 100%. Airborne deployment. Target, the Vanguard fleet. Without a single battle cry, the 100 Golden Corps cadets stepped off the roof. Because they shared Aarav's processing power, their flight wasn't clumsy. They moved like a swarm of perfectly synchronized, hyper-lethal locusts, leaving a massive contrail of golden fire in their wake as they shot straight up into the sky. High above, the vanguard of the celestial army, thousands of Vidyadharas clad in lightning armored up from the Vimanas to intercept the rising mortals. They wielded spears of pure energy, expecting to slaughter terrified, uncoordinated apes. They were met by the Ananta sect. Devansh, node 001, didn't throw a random fireball. Guided by the tether, the 100 cadets formed a massive, three-dimensional geometric array in mid-air. NGT node 001, formation locked. Execute 2x kinetic cleave. 100 golden core swords swung at exactly the same microsecond. The overlapping arcs of prana merged into a single, mile-wide crescent blade of condensed thermal energy. The strike sheared through the celestial vanguard like a hot knife through butter. Over 300 celestial enforcers were instantly vaporized, their lightning armor useless against the perfectly calculated, mathematically flawless 2x combined output of the hive mind. On the central dreadnought, General Vajranapa watched his vanguard get erased in a single strike. His glowing eyes widened. This is no mortal rebellion, the domain stage general snarled, drawing a massive, gravity-forged greatsword. I will sever this anomaly myself. Vajranapa stepped off the dreadnought. As he fell toward Earth, he unleashed his domain. A sphere of absolute, crushing gravity expanded from his body, threatening to flatten the Ananta cadets and the entire city below. Aarav, still standing on the roof of Fort William, finally took his hands out of his pockets. System, Aarav thought. Activate 10x physical multiplier. Let's see what a singularity core can really do. Aarav vanished. The roof of Fort William didn't crack, it simply ceased to exist under the sheer gravitational launch of his jump. He met General Vajranapa in mid-air, directly between the heavens and the earth. Chapter 39, The Weight of the Heavens. The collision occurred precisely at 15,000 feet above Kolkata. There was no sound at first. The sheer kinetic force of their impact created a localized vacuum, pushing the oxygen away so violently that sound waves couldn't travel. A microsecond later, a concussive shockwave of compressed air detonated, shattering every glass window within a 10-mile radius below. Aarav and General Vajranapa hung suspended in the sky, their strikes locked. Aarav's bare, Vajra-dense fist was pressed directly against the flat of Vajranapa's massive, black metal greatsword. You dare touch celestial steel with mortal flesh. Vajranapa snarled, his eyes burning with the blinding light of a dying star. The domain stage general didn't pull his sword back. He simply imposed his will upon reality. Alert, hostile domain, Kshitra, deployed. Local physical laws overwritten. Dominant parameter, absolute gravity. A sphere of distorted, pitch-black space expanded from Vaitranapha's chest, instantly enveloping Aarav. The sky turned dark. The clouds, the ambient light, and the spiritual energy in the air were dragged down toward the earth. Inside a Siddhi manifestation domain, the cultivator is the author of physics. Vaitranapha had severed his mortal attachments to comprehend the ultimate law of gravity. In this sphere, up was down, light was heavy, and a mortal's own blood would weigh enough to crush their heart. Aarav felt the pressure instantly. The 10x multiplier on his physical strength was struggling against a force that was multiplying exponentially every second. His Vatra skeleton groaned, a sound like bending steel girders echoing in his ears. He began to sink, pushed downward by a gravitational force equal to the depths of the Mariana Trench. Kneel, anomaly. Vaitranapha roared, raising his great sword high above his head. The blade absorbed the gravity of the domain, turning into a condensed singularity of crushing force. Your bones are strong, but even diamonds turn to dust under the weight of the heavens. Aarav continued to sink, his boots cracking the compressed air beneath him as if it were solid glass. But as Vaitranapha swung the colossal sword down for the execution, Aarav looked up. He wasn't panting. His azure eyes were completely calm. You think you understand gravity? Aarav whispered. Chapter 40, The Singularity Reversal. Inside Aarav's Danshan, the singularity core, a pitch-black sphere of infinitely dense, collapsed prana began to spin. Passive triggered, void consumption. Target, hostile gravitational domain. Aarav didn't try to push back against Vaitranapha's crushing pressure. He opened his nadis, energy channels, and simply let the gravity in. The celestial general's great sword struck Aarav's raised forearm. It should have cleaved Aarav in half and flattened the city below. Instead, the sword simply stopped. The massive, world-crushing kinetic energy of the blade didn't rebound, it was entirely absorbed into Aarav's body, funneled directly into the black hole sitting in his core. Vaitranapha's eyes widened in absolute shock. The general tried to pull his sword back, but he couldn't. The blade was stuck to Aarav's arm, caught in a gravitational pull far stronger than his own. What is this? Vaitranapha stammered, feeling his domain destabilize. The oppressive, pitch-black sphere surrounding them was being warped, the energy siphoned directly into the mortal standing before him. A domain is just a localized law, Aarav said, his voice distorted, echoing with the terrifying, resonant frequency of a singularity. And a black hole is where laws go to die. System, Aarav commanded. Sync 10x physical and 10x prana multipliers. Route through the singularity core. Synchronization complete. Void state active. Aarav closed his hand around the blade of the celestial greatsword. With a simple, effortless twist of his wrist, Aarav snapped the unbreakable, gravity-forged celestial steel in half. The backlash of the shattered weapon violently ruptured Vaitranapha's domain. The pitch-black sphere of distorted space cracked like a mirror and shattered into thousands of fragments of dead prana. The sky over Kolkata instantly brightened as natural sunlight flooded back into the atmosphere. Vaitranapha gasped, coughing up a mouthful of golden celestial blood as the destruction of his domain caused a severe spiritual backlash. He stumbled backward in the air, looking at the broken hilt of his supreme weapon in horror. A mortal, a mere golden core equivalent, had just shattered a spirit-severing domain with his bare hands. You are no mortal, Vaitranapha breathed, genuine terror finally piercing his ancient arrogance. You are an Asura. A demon born to devour the heavens. I'm just a guy who did the math, Aarav replied. Chapter 41, Severing the General. Aarav didn't give the general time to recover. Agility multiplier x10 activated. Aarav moved. With the singularity core powering him, he didn't just displace the air, he warped the space around him. He appeared directly inside Vaitranapha's guard, bypassing the Celestial's massive wingspan. Vaitranapha reacted with the honed instinct of a 4,000-year-old warrior. He abandoned the broken hilt and thrust a palm glowing with pure, destructive celestial light directly at Aarav's chest. Aarav didn't block. He let the strike hit him. The celestial palm struck Aarav over the heart. The energy instantly vanished, sucked into the singularity core without leaving a single burn mark on Aarav's black combat shirt. My turn, Aarav whispered. Aarav drove a devastating uppercut into Vaitranapha's jaw. The 10x physical multiplier, backed by the infinite density of the black hole in his core, connected with a sickening crack. The celestial general's jaw was obliterated. The sheer kinetic force of the blow didn't just launch him upward, it began to physically tear his celestial body apart on a molecular level. Vaitranapha's nascent soul desperately tried to flee, attempting to abandon the dying physical vessel and escape back to the dreadnought. A glowing white entity tried to peel itself out of the general's shattered forehead. Cognitive multiplier x10. Escape vector predicted. Aarav reached out with his left hand, his fingers clad in crackling azure and black void energy. He grabbed the fleeing nascent soul by the throat, physically halting its teleportation. I told your scout, Aarav said coldly, looking the terrified soul in its glowing eyes. Earth is no longer a farm. Aarav clenched his fist. The singularity core's gravity reversed, turning from a vacuum into a localized, explosive repulsor. Aarav channeled this catastrophic force directly into the general's captured soul and physical body simultaneously. Boom. General Vaitranapha, commander of the Eastern Celestial Vanguard, detonated. He didn't leave a corpse. He didn't leave ash. He was entirely erased from existence, his energy scattered to the cosmic winds. The resulting shockwave cleared the cloud cover for 500 miles, sending a violent atmospheric ripple that slammed into the hulls of the hovering vimanas, dreadnoughts, above. Aarav hovered alone in the clear blue sky, his aura completely calm. He slowly wiped a speck of golden blood from his knuckles. He looked up at the massive, white marble dreadnoughts hanging in the stratosphere. Thousands of Celestials were watching from the decks. They had just witnessed their supreme domain stage commander get dismantled and erased in less than 3 minutes by a mortal fighting barehanded. Aarav raised his hand, pointing a single finger directly at the central flagship. The message was clear: you're next. Chapter 42, The Ground-to-Air Array. High in the stratosphere, the Celestial Armada descended into absolute chaos. On the bridge of the central flagship, a massive vimana constructed of white marble, gold, and anti-gravity yantras lesser Celestials scrambled across crystalline control panels. The death of General Vaitranapah had triggered a catastrophic feedback loop in their command network. Reroute the shield arrays, a fleet captain screamed, his lightning armor flickering with static panic. Lock the dimensional anchors. The mortal is preparing to board. Below them, Aarav still hovered in the clear sky. He wasn't charging blindly. He knew that a celestial dreadnought was wrapped in a Brahmakavaka multi-layered energy shield designed to withstand the heat of a supernova. Even with his singularity core, punching through it manually would drain too much energy. He didn't need to punch through it. He had artillery. System, Aarav commanded. Establish direct neural link to node 001. Sync the hive mind. Down on the ground, standing on the ruined roof of Fort William, Devansh's eyes glowed with a blinding golden light. The other 99 cadets surrounding him mirrored his exact stance. NGT server command, form the Astra cannon array. Target, central dreadnought shields. Array formation. Devansh roared, his voice echoing with the synthesized power of 100 golden cores. The cadets didn't form a sword this time. They formed a massive, concentric geometric mandala on the roof. They raised their hands toward the sky. With their 2x cognitive multipliers linked directly to Aarav's 10x processor, the math was flawless. They were calculating the exact rotational frequency, atmospheric refraction, and prana density of the dreadnought's shields. NGT node 001, coordinates locked. Initiating 2x combined output. A pillar of golden fire, 50 feet wide, erupted from the roof of Fort William. It was a localized orbital strike in reverse. The combined energy of 100 multiplied golden cores shot upward at the speed of light, ripping through the clouds and slamming directly into the belly of the central dreadnought. The impact sounded like a continent snapping in half. The Brahmakavaka shield flared a blinding, desperate purple as it tried to disperse the kinetic and thermal energy. But the hive mind's beam wasn't just raw power, it was a mathematically perfect frequency designed to destabilize the celestial code. The shield held for 3 seconds. Then, it shattered like a massive glass dome. Shields are down. Devansh transmitted through the tether. Breach confirmed. Aarav smiled. Good work. Hold the perimeter. Aarav bent his knees in mid-air. He channeled the gravity of his singularity core into his boots, creating a localized spatial trampoline, and launched himself directly into the breach. Chapter 43, The Marble Deck. Aarav landed on the main deck of the dreadnought with a heavy, bone-rattling thud. The deck was expansive, easily the size of a city block, paved with flawless white marble and lined with towering golden statues of ancient celestial kings. But the pristine beauty of the ship was instantly ruined by the blaring of cosmic alarms. Aarav slowly stood up, the black void energy of his singularity core bleeding off his shoulders like smoke. Hold the line. From the grand golden doors of the bridge, 300 elite celestial guards poured out. These weren't scouts. They were the Kshatriyas of Swarga, heavily armored warriors wielding flaming tridents and bows that fired arrows of condensed starlight. They formed a massive phalanx, blocking the path to the command throne. Aarav cracked his neck. Warning, multiple hostile signatures detected. Average enemy level, peak golden core to early nascent soul. Activating void consumption aura. Fire, the celestial captain screamed. 300 arrows of blinding starlight rained down on Aarav. A single one of these arrows could have leveled the entire city of Kolkata. Aarav didn't even raise his hands. He kept walking forward. As the arrows came within 5 feet of his body, the localized gravity of his singularity core snagged them. The celestial light was violently bent, stretched, and sucked directly into the black void fire surrounding Aarav. The arrows didn't explode, they were simply eaten. The celestial guards froze, their bows still raised. My turn, Aarav whispered. Physical multiplier x10. Agility multiplier x10. He vanished. When Aarav reappeared, he was standing directly in the center of the phalanx. He swept his leg, unleashing a kinetic shockwave so dense it warped the marble deck. The front 3 rows of celestial guards were instantly liquefied, their armor crumbling like tinfoil under the multiplied force. A guard lunged with a flaming trident. Aarav caught the prongs with his bare hand, the heat doing absolutely nothing to his Vajra skeleton. He pulled the guard forward and drove a palm strike into his chest, blasting the celestial's nascent soul completely out of his back, where it was immediately sucked into Aarav's void aura. It wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. In less than 60 seconds, Aarav walked up the grand golden steps toward the bridge. Behind him, the marble deck was covered in the shattered remnants of the heaven's finest warriors. He kicked the massive golden doors open. Chapter 44, the king of the east. The bridge of the Vimana was a vast, circular chamber dominated by a massive holographic projection of the solar system. Sitting on a floating throne of carved sapphire at the center of the room was Maharaja Diksha, the celestial king of the Eastern Armada. He didn't wear armor. He wore robes of spun starlight, and his aura was completely suppressed. He was a void refinement/tribulation stage entity, a being capable of surviving a planetary explosion. The surviving bridge crew backed away in terror as Aarav stepped through the doors, dripping with the golden blood of the guards. Diksha didn't look panicked. He looked at Aarav with a mixture of intense curiosity and profound disgust. "You smell of the void," King Diksha said, his voice perfectly calm, echoing directly into Aarav's mind. "You condensed a singularity instead of a Surya Chakra. A suicidal path. Your mortal vessel will inevitably tear itself apart from the inside out." "It's holding up fine so far," Aarav replied, stepping onto the bridge. "You killed my general. You slaughtered my guards. But you are arrogant to step onto my throne." Diksha stood up. As he did, the ambient gravity in the room didn't increase, it vanished. Aarav found his boots lifting off the floor. The king's law wasn't heavy gravity, it was zero gravity. "Without friction, your physical strength is useless," Diksha stated. The king raised a hand, and a small, intricately woven net of glowing silver threads appeared in his palm. "Alert, supreme heavenly treasure detected, the Pashupajala, net of binding, dot. This artifact severs the connection between the physical body and the soul." Diksha tossed the net into the frictionless air. It instantly expanded, growing to the size of the room, turning into a massive web of laser-thin spiritual energy. It shot toward Aarav at the speed of light, designed to pass through his indestructible skeleton and directly bind his soul. Aarav couldn't dodge. Without gravity, he had no leverage to jump. But he had a multiplier system, Aarav commanded. "If I can't move my body, I'll move the space around me. Maximize the singularity core's gravitational pull. Cognitive multiplier x10 to target the artifact. Singularity output, maximum." Aarav opened his mouth and inhaled. He didn't breathe air. He breathed reality. The pitch-black void energy in his core erupted outward, creating a massive, localized black hole directly in front of his chest. The Pashupajala, a supreme artifact forged by the ancient gods, hit the event horizon of Aarav's void. King Diksha watched in absolute disbelief as his priceless, indestructible heavenly treasure was stretched into a thin line of light, spaghettification, and violently sucked into Aarav's mouth. Aarav literally ate the artifact. Aarav swallowed, his eyes flashing with violent, erratic static as his system processed the immense cosmic code of the net. "Spicy," Aarav said, his boots slamming back down onto the marble floor as his localized gravity overrode the king's frictionless domain. Diksha took a step back, his composure finally breaking. "Monster, what are you?" "I am the Ananta Protocol," Aarav said. Aarav raised his hand, pointing his charred index finger, the one he had used to summon the Brahmashura, directly at the king's forehead. "Now," Aarav said coldly. "Give me the access codes to the fleet's dimensional drive, or I erase your concept from existence." Chapter 45, The Surrender of Kings. King Diksha stared at Aarav's charred index finger. He could feel the residual, terrifying frequency of the Brahmashura lingering on the mortal's skin. A king of Swarga did not fear death. Death simply meant a return to the cycle of reincarnation. But the Brahmashura didn't kill, it erased. It wiped a soul from the cosmic ledger entirely. "You would wipe out this entire dreadnought," Diksha said, his voice trembling for the first time in millennia. "If you detonate the supreme code here, the backlash will ignite the atmosphere of your precious earth." "I have a 10x cognitive multiplier," Aarav replied, his voice a cold, synthetic echo. "I've already calculated the blast radius. It'll singe the ozone layer, but humanity will survive. You won't. Open the dimensional drive." Diksha's hands balled into fists. The humiliation was absolute. A being who had cultivated for thousands of years, who commanded a fleet capable of harvesting planets, was being held at gunpoint by a teenager who had been immortal a month ago. Slowly, Diksha lowered his hands. He walked to the central command console, a massive pillar of floating, liquid sapphire. He placed his palms flat against it and closed his eyes. "The dimensional anchor is disengaged," Diksha said bitterly. "The fleet is locked in a holding pattern. What now? Do you plan to steal my ships and defend your dirtball forever?" "Defending is a waste of resources," Aarav said. Aarav walked past the king and placed his own left hand on the sapphire console. "System link established, Celestial Vimana network. Overriding command architecture." "I'm not stealing your ships to build a wall," Aarav said, turning his gaze toward the massive holographic projection of the solar system. "I'm taking the flagship. Send the rest of the fleet back to Earth's orbit. They belong to the Ananta sect now." Diksha sneered. "And where do you think you are taking my flagship?" "You came to my house to harvest my people," Aarav said, his azure eyes flaring with violent void energy. "I'm going to return the favor. Set the coordinates for Swarga. We're going to heaven." Chapter 46, The Ascension Protocol. Diksha stared at Aarav as if he had lost his mind. "You are insane," the Celestial King whispered. "A mortal body cannot survive the atmospheric pressure of Swarga. The air is condensed celestial prana. It will crush your Vajra bones to dust and ignite your blood." "Start the engine," Aarav ordered, raising his charred finger an inch closer to Diksha's face. Diksha gritted his teeth and initiated the dimensional shift. The sapphire console turned a blinding white. The entire dreadnought began to violently vibrate. Outside the bridge windows, the blue sky of Earth began to tear open, revealing a swirling, chaotic vortex of cosmic colors, the Antariksha, the dimensional void, separating the mortal realm from the divine. Aarav didn't flinch as the ship began to enter the tier. Instead, he closed his eyes and focused on the neural tether connecting him to the surface of Earth. NGT server command, node 001. Acknowledge. 1,000 miles below, standing on the roof of Fort William, Devansh's voice echoed in Aarav's mind. NGT node 001, acknowledged. The fleet is holding position. We are boarding the remaining dreadnoughts. NGT server command, I am taking the Vanguard flagship into Swarga. The tether will stretch across dimensions. You will experience a massive latency in processing power. I am dropping the cognitive multiplier to 5x to conserve server energy. Can you hold the Earth? There was a brief pause on the tether. Then, Devansh's voice returned, laced with cold, calculated confidence. NGT node 001, we have 100 singularity-assisted golden cores and a fleet of celestial warships. Let them try to take this planet. Hunt well, server. Aarav severed the active communication line, leaving the passive buffs running. The dreadnought plunged entirely into the dimensional vortex. The transition was violent. The physical laws of the universe temporarily broke down. For a terrifying 10 seconds, Aarav felt his singularity core threaten to collapse in on itself, but his 10X processor forced the void energy to stabilize. King Diksha, however, smiled. As the dreadnought breached the other side of the vortex, the king unleashed his suppressed aura. Welcome to my domain, anomaly. Diksha roared. Chapter 47,